Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Mikoto is possessive of Naruto harem. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Helghy and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 0. Prologue. Contract. Mikoto Uchiha did her level best to remain relaxed as she gently rocked the toddler in her arms. It was starting to get toward the end of the day, and despite how affable of a child Itachi was, his nerves had frayed beyond what she could normally handle. Beside her, Kushina tried to reassure her with the usual sweet grin she gave her loved ones, but it just didn't quite measure out as enough after the last day, no days, plural of stress Mikoto had suffered through. Thankfully that might all end or at least become better after tonight. That's what her father had told her, as well as Minato. Kushina had told her a version of that same phrase every minute almost for the last hour. Everything will change for the better after this mess is finished, Kushina said with a sure tone, causing Mikoto to shift her eyes between the red-headed beauty and the door nearby. From within the room, muffled voices continued to grow in fervor and volume until they grew into just barely unintelligible shouts. Really, they should have thought of using a privacy seal for the room, but then again, none of what happened tonight would be considered for village security. It didn't quite require the security of such measures. A sudden warmth on her cheek drew her attention back away from the door and to her closest friend, who had decided to lay a soft kiss on her cheek in distraction. Kushina always was an unpredictable one, but still even such an innocent gesture stirred memories of a different time for Mikoto. During her days as a kunoichi of the village, spending her time with Kushina and Minato. Longing ached in her chest just at the thought of it. Kushina, those times with you and Minato. Mikoto had to struggle with her own words and desires. They're in the past. She finally bit out, though her voice was uncharacteristically weaker than she would have liked. Maybe, Kushina said sadly as she slid back into her own chair. Still though, Minato and I will always be there for you, even if you aren't ours anymore, Miko. The two women stared at one another until Mikoto's gaze dropped to the floor. She couldn't look into Kushina's eyes filled with love and care for her, and not feel that ache in her chest return 100-fold. It hurt, but she knew life wasn't fair and she knew her father would come to some compromise, so she refused to even entertain the notion that she could enjoy her truest desires. Mikoto started to say something before she closed her mouth and looked back up to Kushina. Thank you, Kushi, she said before turning her eyes to her son in her arms. Kushina reached over with her hand, careful not to disturb the dozing Itachi, and took Mikoto's hand into her own. After gently squeezing one another's hands, the two women returned to silence as the voices in the nearby room had lowered once again to the occasional muffled sound. They hadn't been sitting for much longer after that when the doors to the office slammed open, causing both of them to jolt, and waking the little boy in Mikoto's arms. Fugaku stormed out of the room and glared at Mikoto with an amount of anger in his eyes she had never seen before. No, he wasn't glaring at her, but at her hand. The one intertwined with Kushina's. The man's frown only deepened as Kushina gave Mikoto a comforting squeeze, but he eventually tore his gaze away to look at the woman he had called wife. The rage lessened and was replaced with disgust. I will have the right to see my son, he snapped before turning sharply, not even sparing the confused little boy a glance or a chance for either woman to get a word in. The next person out of the office was Minato. The soon-to-be Hokage looked a bit flustered by the whole situation as he scratched the back of his head with one hand. The thin, tight smile on his face was easy enough for both women to see through and understand how stressed he had become lately. That filled Mikoto with some guilt. Far more than the look of anger on Fugaku's face had shown, anyway. Minato was busy taking over more and more of the village's operations as Hiruzen's successor, while also leading the talks for peace agreements with IWA, Kumo, and Kiri. Though the latter of those three seemed content to keep fighting even as whispers of growing internal tensions in Water Country made their way to curious ears. The trio stood in silence for a moment as Minato simply stared over at them. His eyes were always expressive, and especially now both of them held something in them that brightened at the sight of the Ravenet and Redhead side by side comforting one another. However, realizing he had stood silently for long enough, he cleared his throat and began to speak. Everything turned out better than we could have hoped. There was just a couple of hiccups, Minato explained. What do you mean? Kushina asked him. Before Minato could answer, they were joined by the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and the village elders, Hamura Mitokado, Koharu Yutane, Danzo Shimura, and Mikoto's own father Kagami Uchiha. The elderly shinobi all looked over the three younger adults and child with unknowable gazes before Danzo spoke sharply and emotionlessly. The three of you will form the first of a new restoration agreement that Hiruzen will be placing into action upon you all agreeing to be the trial group. That being said, it is mandatory you agree, as Fugaku was just led to believe the three of you have all agreed to this trial process back when you achieved Chunin ranks. Danzo spoke matter-of-factly, though it was clear that Minato, Kushina, and Mikoto had no real say in the matter. Something that had Hiruzen sighing and Kagami scowling at the back of Danzo's head. Once you sign the documents, the two of you will officially be wedded to Minato as the matriarchs for the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. Officially freeing you, Mikoto, of any obligation to the Uchiha clan. Hamura explained in an only slightly friendlier tone than Danzo. Really, all the elders were Hardises to the bone. Mikoto was a bit taken back by the revelation. Still, internally she nearly wept in joy and released stress. Since her engagement to Fugaku years ago, she had never thought this could be a possibility. So Mikoto's marriage to Fugaku is officially over, right? Kushina asked, cutting to the point, or at least what she felt was the point, getting a couple looks from the elders. I have to say I'm surprised, Kushina. You are usually so territorial with Minato. I thought the idea of being made to share him with Mikoto would bother you more. Koharu pointed out in genuine surprise. The redhead's laughter caught most of them off guard. If anything, I'm sharing Mikoto with Minato. Those simple words had both Hiruzen and Hamura frozen stiff at the thought, while the tracest amounts of quiet giggling slipped out of their lips. Kagami looked a mix of green and purple in the face as they were talking about relationships with his only child, and his eyes twitched faintly as they zeroed in on Hiruzen and Hamura and spun to a crimson color. Danzo simply grumbled something about unpredictable Uzumaki freaks and stalked off to whatever hole he typically made his lair in, and Koharu just stared at Kushina with an unamused expression. The remaining two members of the group, Minato and Mikoto, at least had the decency to blush at the topic, unlike their more brash third member of their new family. Still a bit green and shooting fiery Uchiha patented glares at Hiruzen and Hamura for no doubt picturing his daughter and her lovers in their head, Kagami led the group back into the office so they could get the backdated paperwork signed and put this whole business behind them. If you two would just sign that, we can finish up here, Kagami said as he waved at the two forms on the desk side by side. Mikoto handed the still sleepy Itachi to Minato as the toddler glanced around the new surroundings, too tired to really interact with the world around him. The blond man smiled at the boy and gently hefted him up into a comfortable position. Itachi was a very well-behaved child and didn't even seem affected by the change, beyond following his mother with his eyes, keeping her in his line of sight. The pair bent over the paper, Kushina barely skimming before she signed, while Mikoto took a little longer. She was happy she did as her eyes widened at the specifications of the agreement. Picking the form up, she read it again before turning to look over at the Hokage and elders, all of which sported collectively stoic expressions. This paper says that any sons we have with Minato will be automatically placed under the act as well, and that any women that he marries will be required to sign an amended agreement. The village would have too much influence over our children's lives, Mikoto said. Kushina stepped back over to the desk and snatched up the paper, reading over it more closely this time. Stopping partway down the page, she released a faint hiss-like sound and made to tear the page to pieces, only for it to prove surprisingly resistant. Shooting a glare at Minato, the man sent her a roll of the eyes back in response, causing her to turn her agitation on the four elderly shinobi on the other side of the desk. The seals on that won't let you tear it apart that easily, Kushina, Hiruzen said with an exasperated sigh as the woman slammed the paper back down onto the table. Then I'll disable the seals and destroy these documents, old man, she shouted back, only to stop when Minato spoke. We had to make some kind of concession, Kushina. We essentially asked the Hokage and elders to involve themselves in clan business. This could have been a huge issue for them if things blew up in their face. So to get them on board, I had to give up something they wanted, Minato explained. You drug us into this using the excuse of building up our forces with more bloodline-capable shinobi from strong stock. If this wasn't in the benefit of Konoha, it wouldn't involve us at all. This is how you pay the piper, so to speak. Koharu spoke sharply. You elders don't have actual power. Only the Hokage. Hokage-sama, surely there's another way, Kushina began to argue, but her words petered off as Hiruzen shook his head at her. Officially, Kushina, they hold no official power in the village. However, the reason each of them is my advisor and elder to the village is because they have spent their entire lives building up their own realms of political power here and in the capital of Fire Country. If they truly held no power, I assure you Danzo would likely have been arrested by now for all of the antics he tends to get himself into, the aged Hokage said as he settled himself into his chair with a sigh. Hamura and I are still in the room, and Hiruzen, don't try to downplay your part in this, the old woman barked. Kushina and Mikoto shot the old man a paired set of betrayed looks. That caused him to let out another heavy sigh and nod sadly. It was the truth, he was Hokage after all. Anything for the good of the village. Everything for the good of the village. Either way, we should move on. The fact remains that we all will do whatever is best for Konoha. That certainly includes building up the honorable Uzumaki clan, and forging a Namikaze clan of powerful loyal Sharingan wielders. Hamura joined into the conversation. I don't think I'm much like what you are implying of the current Sharingan wielders we have, Hamura. Kagami growled, getting the other man to readjust his glasses slightly, and frown at his old teammate. We know you and Mikoto are loyal to the village Kagami, and Koharu began to try and intervene before a new argument could break out. But you aren't so sure about the rest of the clan, is that it? He asked. Some of Sensei's prejudices should have died with him. Hiruzen groaned. If you two cannot see how the majority of the Uchiha have taken to hold themselves apart from the villagers, that is your own failing. Hamura threw in, getting a nod from his female teammate. This squabbling is getting us nowhere. Minato interrupted, stopping the argument. Shooting a look at Mikoto, he communicated his wishes without saying anything more. Despite her reservations, Mikoto leaned down and signed the paper on the desk. The guilt she felt about signing power in her future children's relationships over to the village pulled at her heart, but if she didn't agree, what would it matter anyway? She would struggle to give Itachi a happy life as it was with what Fugaku had attempted with him, and what he had planned in the future. Hopefully they would forgive her when time for that actually came around. With that done, everything we need is finished here. Come Mikoto, I'll have Satsuya and his wife collect your things from the compound and take them to your new place. I'll have them bring little Shursui too, he can play with Itachi. Kagami said as he walked with the new trio and the toddler they carried. Minato and Kushina continue ahead after getting a nod from Mikoto. The Uchiha turned Namikaze faced her father but quickly dropped her gaze to the ground. I'm sorry, Dad. I know it's selfish of me. I should have just adapted and stayed with Fugaku, but after he took Itachi to that battlefield and made him, I couldn't anymore. Mikoto began to ramble, the stress of her recent struggles impacting her again, compounded by the worry of disappointing her father, who was one of her most cherished bonds. Mikoto was shocked when he didn't answer her. Not in that he didn't, but because his embrace didn't require him to speak as he hugged her closely to his chest. The familiar feeling of his arms around her shoulders and the gentle shake as he chuckled calmed her roiling emotions instantly. I would do anything for you and Itachi to be happy and safe, Miko, Kagami said. What about the clan elders? They won't take all this lying down, and they'll be especially unhappy that we allowed the village leadership to become involved. Clan business being infringed like this, especially on the Uchiha. Mikoto quickly began to work herself back up again. Despite being a horrible father and husband, Fugaku is still an excellent shinobi and administrator, Kagami explained. I know that better than anyone, Mikoto groused. Be that as it may, Mikoto, Fugaku remains my legal heir. Thankfully Itachi will be required to remain his heir, but you and any other children you have been cut from the line of inheritance. They may have the Sharingan, but they will be Namikaze, not Uchiha, Kagami explained. The woman sighed and chuckled morbidly. I should have figured that. Enough of this talk. Let's get you home. Your new husband and wife have probably started to get worried, Kagami said, an odd expression passing on his face at the addition of wife to his sentence. That would take getting used to, he supposed. It had been 4 years since that day, and not one had passed that Mikoto, Kushina, or Minato had looked back in regret. Even now, busy as he was with the business of being Hokage, Minato was far more warm and caring a husband to 2 wives than Fugaku had been to one alone. It helped that the 3 had been friends and lovers in the past, but it took work to keep love going, and their relationship only seemed to grow stronger as time progressed. Another help to keep such happiness in the home was the addition of 2 new members of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. Even now Mikoto and Kushina couldn't help but coo playfully down at their sweet babies. All but looming over the women's shoulders, and seeming to try and compete on who could look more aloof and yet somehow overprotective of the women and infants, Kakashi and Itachi watched on. It was an interesting sight. Both Kushina and Mikoto were loving and warm women in general, but when it came to the little bundles in their arms, they entered a new level of care that was a bit awkward to sit and watch. At least it was for the 2 socially awkward child soldiers. Then again, they weren't necessarily what one might consider the hallmark for emotional understanding. Geez, would the 2 of you relax already? Kushina said, turning her head away from her little son to look at the older 2 boys she considered just as much her family. Kushina is right. Itachi, Kakashi, the 2 of you already put so much on your shoulders, it wouldn't kill you to sit and enjoy some time with your little siblings, would it? Mikoto added, tossing in a pout. One matched by her red-headed compatriot. Itachi offered no resistance to the women plopping down onto the comfortable chair beside his mother, and leaning over for a good view of his new baby sister staring up at him from her arms. Kakashi, on the other hand, was a little more hesitant. I really shouldn't, I need to. Kakashi began to argue, only for Kushina to shoot him a look. You are the ward of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans, which practically makes you our son, now do as you're told, Kushina said sweetly, though the odd swish of her hair gave the boy all the information he needed to know about what would happen if he argued. Beside her, the flicker of red in Mikoto's eyes scared him just as much. Really, the 2 of them rubbed off on one another too much. Kakashi dropped into a seat and breathed slightly more relaxed when both women looked away from him and back to the babies in their hands. Kushina's son, Naruto's, laughter had taken all their focus off of him, which he appreciated. Not even a year old, and already looking out for his big brother. He was such a good boy. Ah, did you like seeing your super mummies put that bad Kakashi back into his place, Naruto-chan? Kushina giggled, snapping back to her bubbly personality. She laughed even more as the boy snagged some of her long hair in his hands. The woman loved letting him play with it. He didn't yank at it, or even chew on it, just running his little fingers through the locks of hair like it was the most interesting thing in the world. As he continued to be distracted by her hair, Kushina gently rubbed his cheek with her hand, getting him to turn to look up at her face again. Kushina could never get tired of this. Just looking down at her precious child. He was like the perfect blending of herself and her husband. Red hair, slightly darker than her own, and already Kushina knew it would grow to be an organized mess just like his father's. Similarly, he had Minato's bright blue eyes, which Kushina loved so much. The rest of his features bore more of a resemblance to her, though he was a baby after all, so it was hard to tell yet. The unique whisker marks on his cheek made him all the cuter. That was actually a feature he shared with his sister laying in Mikoto's arms at the moment. Though Naruto held an additional whisker on each cheek than she did. That had been something that shocked both mothers till their midwife, Biwako, had explained that it was likely due to the proximity of the Kyuubi's chakra during the conception of the children. That had set both women to blushing furiously at the memory. Nearby, Mikoto smiled as she glanced at Kushina fawning over her baby. The redhead had been so worried she'd be a bad mother somehow, which had both Mikoto and Minato nearly laughing due to her already babying Kakashi and Itachi so much as it was. Turning to look down at her own baby, Mikoto couldn't help the broadening smile on her face as bright blue eyes stared back up at her. Like Naruto, Masaki loved to play with her mother's hair. However, she preferred to have it tickled across her face, causing soft giggles every time the Namikaze matriarch drug her raven locks across the child's nose. Naruto and Masaki shared many features, like their stunning eyes and adorable whisker-like markings. They also both looked very much like their mothers. Masaki had her mother's black hair, though it was far more wild already than Mikoto's own straight hair. Masaki was overall a quieter child than her brother, but they preferred to be kept near one another, and even shared a crib. While Masaki was a quieter child, she was also the more independent of the two. Far too curious for her own good. Even now she was scrunching up her nose after trying to eat her mother's hair and learning it wasn't as tasty as she had hoped. Laughing at the cute face she made, Mikoto stopped her little girl from crying by tickling her, faintly pushing the child into another fit of soft giggles that had Mikoto happily grinning at the sound. "Mother, I want to visit Sasuke at the clan compound." Itachi caught her attention as he stood from his seat. Mikoto inwardly sighed at the detached manner of speech from her son, but was happy he wanted to be a good big brother not just for Naruto and Masaki, but also his half-brother by Fugaku as well. "Of course, darling. Just be safe," Mikoto replied, and Itachi quickly nodded before using the body flicker technique to leave. That alone had Mikoto frowning deeper. Itachi was only 7 and his father had already pushed him to that point in his training. That thought led to Fugaku and the rest of the Uchiha clan. As her father had said, the elders had confirmed Fugaku as heir to the clan should Kagami pass, effectively stating that in the eyes of the Uchiha clan she remained married to Fugaku and her daughter was a bastard born of unfaithfulness. Something that she could see in their eyes whenever they encountered one another. The clan had largely taken the entire situation as a direct slap in the face to the clan as a whole. As if her marrying Minato was in some way pointed as just a slight toward the honor of the Uchiha. The clan seemed to grow more and more lost in their resentment with each passing day. Mikoto truly felt sorry for that little boy, Sasuke, sired by Fugaku on one of the middle-aged women, a widow named Tamako. The woman had raised 3 fine children, all of which had died in the Third Shinobi War. Now she was as gruff and cold as Fugaku himself, and while she seemed to give the baby all the necessities a mother was required to, Mikoto feared just what kind of person the 2 perfect Uchiha would raise. Now it seemed the clan elders along with Fugaku had begun to angle at taking more and more power for their clan. Her father had said that they intended to push Itachi into achieving the role of Hokage as the youngest to do so within a few decades, and little Sasuke would take his place as head of the clan. Essentially cutting Mikoto's bloodline out of the clan leadership for good. It wasn't too surprising. For a while the clan had been split on her bloodline remaining as the heads of the clan. Her grandmother was the youngest sibling and only sister of Madara Uchiha himself. As he had no children, the leadership of the clan had passed to her husband and then her son, Kagami. Now, though, it would finally be passed outside the direct line. "What has you so bothered, Mikoto? Is the idea of Itachi going to his father's place that upsetting?" Kushina asked in a mildly worried tone. "No, it's not really that, just thinking about the clan, I guess," Mikoto replied. Proving to be more perceptive than most expected, though by now her closest loved ones knew better, Kushina frowned slightly before nodding her head slowly. "I feel bad for Fugaku's new son." Mikoto only nodded as Kushina partially hit the nail on the head with that comment. Fugaku and Tamako would no doubt love Sasuke as any parent did, however she couldn't help but feel the boy would grow up in a repressive environment at best. At worst, he would be more harshly treated than Itachi had been to make him into their ideal prodigy. The redhead, as she often did when Mikoto felt upset, reached over and intertwined their hands together before giving her a gentle squeeze. Don't worry. We'll do everything we can to help the kid out as he grows up. Fugaku be damned. Oh, we can even have little Naruto and Masaki be his friends and play together. Kushina rambled on. Mikoto smiled before leaning forward and kissing Kushina. Both had gotten back into the swing of their relationship over the last few years. They still drew some looks, especially when both of them included Minato in their public displays of affection, but it had grown to become a normal thing for them. After all, other more normal couples showed their love for one another with kisses and embraces in public all the time without anyone else batting an eye. Why should their unique circumstances be cause for changing their behavior? Kakashi had just been about to reach for the Ika in his vest when the sight of the two women kissing tenderly froze him on the spot. The poor boy could only break the spell that had him staring when he noticed Kushina had ended the kiss and turned to smirk at him. She loved to pick on the boy. He was like a cross between a son and a little brother. Right now, she intended to tease someone else in a far more mature way. Kashi-chan, I need you to watch over Naru-chan and Saki-chan for a few moments, alright? Kushina said as she gently placed the red-headed baby into Kakashi's arms, swiftly followed by a raven-haired girl in the other. The Hitaki could only sigh and nod in acceptance as Kushina dragged Mikoto to her feet. With that, Kushina practically dragged Mikoto into the house, both giggling like teenage girls all the way inside and up the stairs. This left Kakashi alone with two babies staring up at him with curious bright blue eyes. He hadn't been alone with the babies for more than 3 minutes when suddenly Minato flashed into the backyard of his house. He looked around for a moment before settling his eyes on Kakashi and couldn't keep the smile off his face at seeing the boy holding his children so carefully. It was a rare sight to see the prodigious shinobi acting so gentle. It was a sight to behold. Minato almost wished he had his camera on him. Almost, the dry glare his student shot him at the moment made him realize the boy had him figured out. Kakashi, could you? Minato began to ask before the boy rolled his eye and groaned. They went upstairs without you, Kakashi said. Minato's eyes glazed over and a goofy smile spread on his lips before he shot an apologetic look toward Kakashi. You make a great babysitter, Kakashi, Minato said before shooting into the house and likely upstairs in his wake. Kakashi simply sighed again before glancing back down at the babies only for his face to pinch in disgust. Looking down at the happy-looking children, Kakashi groaned at the task of changing diapers. Maybe he should move back in at the Hitaki estate. It was small for a clan estate but massive for one person. Surely it would give him the privacy he needed to read Ika in dirty diaper-free peace. Hearing the two babies giggle as they caught clear sight of one another again over their small blankets, he realized he'd give up all that peaceful free time in exchange for staying close to these little bundles of joy. He was their big brother after all. It was his job. A 5-year-old Naruto and Masaki walked hand in hand in front of their mothers down one of the larger roads of Konoha toward the academy. Both had grown to be adorable children just as their mothers and father had expected. Beside them, Itachi walked along the path to the school he had already graduated 4 years prior. In front of him was a boy around the same age as Masaki and Naruto that shared a few features with Itachi, though his hair had a slight brownish tint to its ravenette coloring. The Uchiha walked on the opposite side of his elder brother from the rest of the group, though. It was a recurring action whenever Itachi brought the boy around his other siblings. The hope had been that they could give all 3 children a friend in one another. Instead, Sasuke considered Naruto and Masaki as stealing his brother's time from himself, and even had called Masaki an abomination in the past. That is, he had attempted to, settling for calling her a monster after stumbling over the word and making the others laugh. That laughter had been short-lived and Naruto had flung himself to his sister's defense in as eloquent a manner as a 5-year-old could. He tackled the other boy to the ground and tried to shove dirt into his mouth for calling his sister a name like that. The children had been at each other's throats since then. While Masaki tried her best to keep Naruto from jumping on the Uchiha boy, largely from her mother's urging, she wouldn't tolerate him being mean to Naruto any more than Naruto would of Sasuke being mean to her. As for the parents of Masaki and Naruto, they were predominantly sad when thinking on the situation. Sasuke clearly hadn't come up with those insults himself, which only meant that he was hearing such things about Mikoto and Masaki at home, which had led to bad blood to only thicken between the now sitting 4th Hokage and Mikoto's first husband. Once they were all dropped off at the academy, Naruto and Masaki headed to their classroom and found their seats. Sasuke sat by the window as far as he could from the Uzumaki and Namikaze siblings. That and everyone else too. Naruto and Masaki were soon joined by a handful of other students from their year. Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akimichi were among those they knew best in class. They'd been friends for a while as their parents all worked closely together and were friends to an extent as well. Aligned with the two boys was Ino Yamanaka, who was arguably Masaki's closest friend besides Naruto. Over the last year, a young Sakura Haruno had also joined into their group. a friend of Aino's. When the children had all started the academy, she had been sure to include the Pinkette in their time together. She was a bit of the odd one out, all of the other children in their group being heirs to a clan, but over the last year Masaki had pulled Ino and thereby Sakura into plenty of training sessions, leading to the civilian-born girl to actually be among some of the best in her class now that her physical abilities were beginning to catch up to her high grades in bookwork. Outside of the loner Uchiha, and the clan brat clique as some less friendly instructors had nicknamed their group, there were few notable students. Shimura was a bit of an odd duck. He was an awkward but exceedingly talented boy. Supposedly he was the grandson of one of the village elders, but his parents had died, and so he had largely been raised by staff of the small but wealthy Shimura family. Shino Aburame didn't seem particularly interested in interacting with other students, though he also didn't seem to actively avoid them like Sasuke did. He was just overly quiet and imposing, and as is common with small children, such things kept him at arm's length. His hive of Kakechu didn't do him any favors. Kiba Inuzuka and his positively tiny partner Akamaru often drew the attention of the entire class. Sadly, never in a good way. The boy often tried to chat with others but never really clicked with them and focused more on his puppy. Still, he remained the most rambunctious of students, trying to get others' attention whenever he felt bored or lonely. The last of the notable students was Hinata Hyuga. Like most Hyuga, she held an air of superiority to others, even at age 5. Unlike the rest of them, Hinata was very vocal and hot-tempered. She interacted with Kiba more than anyone in the class, but never positively. Simply striking or shouting at him when annoyed. Naruto and Masaki were the most popular students in class, drawing the attention of all their classmates off of their parentage alone. Even Hinata watched them from the corner of her special eyes, not that she really needed to, given that she had arguably the purest Byakugan in generations. Only truly rivaled by her elder cousin Niji and perhaps her baby sibling whenever they would be born in the coming months. Yes, Naruto and Masaki were popular, but that didn't directly translate into well-liked. Kiba was envious of the attention they got without even trying. Hinata wanted the same. Shino was wary of being near them because of that same attention they carried, and Sasuke despised them. Today, though, there would be even more focus on them. The first day of student sparring had come, and the other students, especially the heirs to clans and shinobi families, were intent on establishing the pecking order, even if they didn't understand that was what they were doing. Many children wondered how well they would compare to their classmates, and if their friends they had made would do as well or better than themselves. Just as many, though, were focused on the Uzumaki and Namikaze siblings. They couldn't help but wonder if they'd live up to the hype their parentage gave them. So far the academy has been super boring, but hopefully when we start sparring today it will be fun, Naruto said, getting a few agreements from his friends. If it's boring to you too, why don't you just try to sleep or something like Shikamaru does? Ino asked the redhead. 'Cause I'm not boring the classes, duh. Naruto replied, getting some laughter from his friends and a half-hearted glare from Shikamaru. Plus Masaki started giving Naruto a look, causing the boy to stick his tongue out at his half-sister. Plus my moms and dad and big brother all did pretty well in the academy, so I guess I wanted to, Naruto explained. Sasuke heard the boy's choice of words and shot a glare up at Naruto through narrowed eyes. Itachi isn't your brother, he said with a pinched expression. Naruto practically growled and opened his mouth to respond to the Uchiha, only for Masaki to cover his mouth with her hands. Kushi-mama and Miko-mama said not to get into any fights, Masaki reminded him. Fine, the Uzumaki said with a huff. I hope I get Sasuke in sparring. I'm gonna kick his butt. The teacher gathered up the class and led them out to the sparring rings in the schoolyard. Suddenly the idea of sparring became much more real, and several of the children, primarily among the civilian-born kids, quieted down and clearly worried. Among his group of friends, Naruto quickly noticed the civilian girl among them had become more closed off than she normally was and decided to cheer her up by simply grabbing her hand like he often did with Masaki and squeezing it. When Sakura turned to the red-headed boy, he shot her a toothy grin that stretched his whiskered cheeks in a way that reminded her of a kitten or puppy. It's alright, Sakura, everybody will just do their best. You too, he said to her, causing her to smile back at him brightly. Beside them, Masaki frowned faintly and snatched up Naruto's free hand in her grasp. She wasn't sure why. Sakura was her friend too, and she wanted her to do well in the spars, but she didn't like it when he spent too much time with their friends. Sometimes she wanted Naruto to herself, and the way he sweetly treated Sakura brought that same feeling forward even more boldly. Naruto, glancing at Masaki, quirked an eyebrow at her behavior before smiling at her too. You'll do great, Masaki-chan. It's just like practice at home with Dad, Kushi-mama and Miko-mama, Naruto said, thinking she also felt nervous about the spar. Right, she said simply, still not sure why she was acting as she was. Alright, class, the instructor called, getting their attention. We're going to call you out in pairs to begin sparring. We're just here to see what you have got, so don't worry about not doing perfectly, just do your best. We'll be training you to improve after today, so this is just to see where to begin. Alright? The students seemed slightly less worried now that Tsubaki, the head instructor for first years in the academy, had explained they would be taught how to improve. They all still wanted to prove themselves though. First up, Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame. Tsubaki called. Both boys walked up to their positions. Kiba looked excited though a bit nervous to fight someone outside his usual training with his clan. Opposing him, Shino simply adjusted his glasses and took a stance, the image of stoicism even as a little boy. Alright, no killing blows, if I need to step in I will. Good luck, boys, Tsubaki said as she lifted a hand and waved it down, starting the match. It was over very quickly. Several of the children laughed outright, and the poor Inuzuka boy was embarrassed as he landed on his back and the Aburame heir placed a knee into his chest. Winner, Shino Aburame. The instructor called. Perform the unison sign. Shino helped Kiba up and both boys crossed fingers before rejoining the throng of students. Kiba tried to avoid others' eyes as he picked up his puppy, only to see a couple of students, namely fellow clan heirs, were looking his way. What surprised him was that they weren't mocking or laughing at him like the rest of the children. Instead, they just looked at him as if they were still curious about what he could do. It embarrassed him all over again as he sank deeper into his fur-lined coat. Hopefully next time he got a chance to spar, he could get a chance to at least show what he could do. Following Kiba and Shino's bout, a handful of civilian children went, including Sakura, who made easy work of her opponent thanks to the physical activity Ino's family, and the families of her new friends had placed her in. Choji and Shikamaru had also both gone, and even while looking distracted in Choji's case, or completely uninterested in Shikamaru's, they won their matches with a few quick dodges and strikes. Naruto Uzumaki and Sai Shimura, Tsubaki called out. Both boys stepped up to the ring. Sai was placid as he had been for the earlier parts of the year, but Naruto was a bit disappointed he wasn't going to get to put the Uchiha brat in his place. Still, he was excited at the prospect of a good fight against someone his own age besides his sister. At home, the only other sparring partners he had were his parents, Itachi, and very rarely Kakashi. Begin! Tsubaki called out, waving her hand. Neither boy hesitated. Rushing one another, both avoided the other's initial strike before advancing past the other and pivoting smoothly, and lancing out with kicks toward each other's heads. That was where both boys began to differentiate in the styles they had been taught the basics of. Sai's style was clearly meant to be used for genjutsu and ninjutsu-focused shinobi, creating opportunities to use their main skill sets. That being said, his skill with it was far above what any child his age should possess. Had he been properly equipped with a blade, it was likely he would have proven far greater of a challenge for the redhead coming toward him at speeds he simply couldn't match. In contrast to Sai, Naruto's style was vicious, or at least it would be when he was highly skilled in it. Multiple times Naruto struck points on Sai's body that would be devastating if hit at full power or kami forbid with chakra-enhanced limbs. Sai's joints ached and tightened slightly, his chest burned, and he felt like his ribs were rattled. Even after the training his grandfather had bestowed upon him, despite not allowing him into his specialized program, Sai couldn't maintain his resistance against the pain, and tears welled in his eyes as he fought back the whimpers from the pain. Naruto continued on though, circling Sai and striking out whenever an opening appeared. A highly efficient and deadly style created by his mother and father would be what he eventually wielded. In its unmastered form for now, it amounted to mostly outpacing his foe and landing blows in the most painful places possible until they gave in. Finally, with his left leg giving out, Sai fell to a knee and Naruto stopped behind him, a blow frozen mid-swing. Both boys remained still, gasping for breath after what felt like an extremely quick fight for them. In reality, it had been longer than most of the previous fights combined. Their classmates were awestruck at the abilities of the two. The instructors were shocked as well. They weren't completely caught off guard like the children had been, but still, to think such young students could be quite so well trained at such a young age was all but unheard of outside of geniuses like Kakashi Hatake and Itachi Uchiha. Neither boy was to that level, of course. However, Tsubaki could already tell she would need teaching assistance with how split the education level of her students was. She would remain their primary sensei for the year and still handle most of the classwork and grading, but she doubted she could give her students the time they would need if she was constantly helping the civilian students catch up. Without even being prompted, Naruto helped Sai up and formed the unison sign. The quiet boy gave his former opponent an extremely thin smile before letting the Uzumaki lead him over to a bench to sit and rest after the fight had taken place. Masaki watched the interaction with a smile. Naruto had a tendency to make friends everywhere he went, according to her moms. Even as a baby, evidently he drew people to him. Masaki herself wasn't antisocial truly, but she didn't particularly enjoy the company of groups or strangers all that much. Still, seeing Naruto with others made her ire grow faintly. Her mood already was soured by the sudden anger she felt towards Sakura earlier had darkened once more, and she huffed while crossing her arms. Masaki Namikaze and Sasuke Uchiha, Tsubaki called out. Many students were surprised. This would be the first fight between a girl and a boy that they had witnessed. The Namikaze heiress was too focused on her own confused anger that she didn't care who her opponent was as she stomped into position across from Sasuke and took up her stance. Sasuke sneered at the girl opposite him. He hated her and her mother for taking his brother from the clan so often. Everything his mother and father told him about the Namikaze and Uzumaki made him hate them even more. There were plenty of other reasons for his hatred of the girl, but that she could unlock the Sharingan and not have the fan of the Uchiha remained the biggest one by far. His father had told him to leave his mark and put the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans in their place today. He would do just that. The moment that Tsubaki-sensei began the match, Sasuke rushed forward and engaged with his opponent. Or tried to. Sliding around Sasuke's first punch and then under the second and third, Masaki grit her teeth as she had to bring her arms up to block the knee he aimed for her belly. Rather than shove it away, though, she did just as Miko Mama and Kushi Mama had taught, wrapping herself around the boy's leg and rolling with it. Shocked by the action, Sasuke lost his footing and both children tumbled to the ground. From there things got worse for him as Masaki's arms and legs became like steel traps for his own limbs. Naruto had been taught to strike the joints and most painful spots on an opponent's body and outpace and outlast them in a fight. Masaki, on the other hand, was taught to wrap her enemy up in as close as possible and get them locked with her eyesight the moment she could. For now, though, rather than eye contact, her goal was a few good hard punches to the forehead and face. After the third hit on his head, Sasuke had gone from angry to royally pissed that not only was this half-blood getting the better of him, she was making it look easy. Sasuke was furious now. He wouldn't let some girl, one with dirted Uchiha blood or not, beat him. The boy managed to wrench himself free, though doing so caused his arm and hips to practically scream at him, pain from the strain put on the joints. Lunging at the girl again, he didn't expect her to sweep under his arms and wrap herself around him once again, like she was hugging him. He then got to feel a brief moment of weightlessness as he was hefted a couple of inches off of his feet and then slammed down onto his back, with Masaki quickly tangling their limbs together and pulling as hard as she could. Sasuke had tears running down his face after that. He hurt everywhere, and the longer the girl kept pulling on his arms, the more he was sure that she was going to rip them off. Just as he was about to cry out and submit, Masaki released him and rolled off him. Taking her sudden action as overconfidence, blinking through the tears of pain, Sasuke spun out a last-second kick connecting with her leg. "Masaki!" Naruto shouted when he saw his sister cry out in pain and fall. Sasuke quickly moving to continue attacking her. The red-headed boy was livid and practically flew toward the ring straight for the Uchiha. Tsubaki had already stepped in, however, and grabbed the Uchiha herself, tightly wrapping her hands around the boy's bicep, making him wince at the pain. The match was over, Sasuke. I already called for Masaki. Calm down, she ordered, only to have to lift the boy and swing around to keep him away from the Uzumaki projectile that went flying past. Naruto turned like a bull seeing red and tried to get a hold of the Uchiha boy once more as the rest of the students began hollering in support, or generally making noise. Tsubaki shouted at both boys as Sasuke began trying his best to kick out at Naruto while she kept them separated. In the end, it was Masaki calling out her brother's name that put an end to the chaos that had enveloped the training yard. After he rushed to her side and helped her up, he all but carried her to the side of the sparring ring while glaring over at the Uchiha boy. Naruto and Masaki were quickly joined by their group of friends, a group that had seemingly grown with the addition of a few of their other classmates. Hinata had at some point implanted herself with Sakura and Ino and convinced them into being her friends, or at least the closest thing a proud Hyuga could claim to have as friends. Kiba and Sai had joined them as well, and while he hadn't remained with them, Shino had stopped briefly to offer his congratulations to Naruto and Masaki on their victories and ask if Masaki was injured by the Uchiha's cowardly and unfitting attack from a member of a distinguished clan. The rest of the afternoon was spent mostly with the children simply interacting with one another. The teachers had learned that leaving students to mingle the first day after spars until the school day was out would help to build bonds between them. Konoha's primary military doctrine focused heavily on cooperation and teamwork between its shinobi, and moments to get to know one another helped to build the framework for what would later become easier unit cohesion. Sadly for Sasuke, or at least in the teachers' minds, he would be excluded from this chance to interact with his classmates, and that, coupled with his actions at the end of his match with Masaki, helped to solidify his position as the outcast among his classmates. While a few civilian-born children would quickly forget and forgive the event, Sasuke's true peers, those of the heirs of Konoha's shinobi clans and families, weren't so prone to forget how he acted, not that it would be necessary, as after getting punished for the situation, Sasuke only grew to hate the Uzumaki and Namikaze children more. At the end of the day, Naruto and Masaki's mothers picked them up from school. Sasuke's mother had also come to retrieve him. Like her son all day, she stood far away from the other parents and refused to interact with them, hardly greeting her child with anything more than a rigid nod before leading him back to the Uchiha compound. Kushina and Mikoto were both upset about what had happened between Masaki and Sasuke during sparring that day, but accepted the class's sensei's handling of the situation. They were happy both kids were collecting a group of friends from among their classmates, and especially among their fellow heirs. Those were the children of their own friends after all. Once they got home, and they had checked to make sure both kids were in fact alright and not too injured from the spars earlier in the day, Kushina and Mikoto began their own training of Naruto and Masaki. They kept it focused on subjects the children had been working on over the last few weeks. For Masaki, that was trying to finally create a fireball. She had managed large gouts of flame up to this point, even some that had begun to take the shape of a large ball, but a truly sufficient version of the jutsu still eluded her. Naruto similarly had the beginning for his jutsu down. A barrier composed from his chains capable of forming a large sphere around himself and a group of others. He could create the proper number of chains and form the barrier, but maintaining their structure and durability for more than a couple of moments was extremely difficult, but combined with that same barrier being struck by weapons and jutsu, it was practically useless as it was. While either child managed to make a breakthrough today, it was clear they both were getting closer. Naruto's chains now held up for the same amount of time under sustained attack as they once had without any kind of damage, and Masaki hadn't realized it yet, but she had begun shaping her chakra well enough to avoid injuring herself as she formed the burst of flame just as the chakra left her lips. Alright, now, normally you two would spar right now, but since you had your first day of in-class sparring, we are giving you the rest of the evening off. Go get washed up, it'll be time to eat before you know it. Kushina explained, getting cheery agreements from the kids before they headed up to the estate. Both women watched as they went. Bittersweet smiles laced their faces as they thought about how the two were growing up. They couldn't be more proud, of course, but every day Naruto and Masaki excelled at their shinobi studies and training more and more. It wouldn't be long before they were graduating and becoming genin, and from there going on to chunin and beyond. The speed that time passed when thinking about the development of their babies was almost unimaginable. The last half a decade felt like barely any time had passed at all. Just as Kushina was about to nudge Mikoto, who was especially focused on the backs of their little ones, Itachi dropped from the trees nearby with an odd look on his face that seemed out of place. He was typically a very reserved though content and kind boy, however he looked stricken at the moment, or at least as close as either woman, the two that had raised him, had ever seen. Itachi, what's wrong? Kushina asked, causing the boy's troubled look to seemingly double in worry. The expressions he made looking almost as if he was in pain. It's about grandfather, Itachi said before stopping, a bit of water building in his eyes as his mouth worked wordlessly to speak. Itachi had grown very close to his grandfather over the years. In fact, the man had practically adopted Itachi and his two closest friends Shursui and Izumi under his wing for the last 5 years. He seemed to see the potential in the three of them, and not just as shinobi, but as a new start for the Uchiha clan. A second chance, he called them to Mikoto and her sister, wife and husband, when they would discuss situations surrounding the clan behind closed doors. Wrapping the boy in a tight hug, Mikoto felt her own tears begin slipping down her face as Kushina soon joined the embrace. All three grieved for the man who had done so much for their family's happiness, and who had helped to make Konoha reach such a peaceful state as it currently enjoyed. They grieved for the man who had acted like the father and grandfather they had needed despite not being a legal part of his family. While they stayed like that, tightly wound into each other's arms to comfort one another, a unifying thought slid through their minds, though they tried to ignore it and focus on the loss of their loved one out of respect. Fugaku Uchiha and the elders now had control of the Uchiha clan as a whole. Naruto and Masaki had grown quite a bit more skilled over the last 2 years. The two 7-year-olds had remained at the top of their class, with only Sasuke Uchiha surpassing them now. The boy had become far more determined and focused over the last couple of years, and far angrier as well. Slipping through his sister's grasp, Naruto narrowly managed to avoid a grapple that would have been Masaki's key to ending the fight. Striking out with his own attack, a flurry of punches in quick succession, Masaki dodged or blocked each before twisting a leg around Naruto's own and sending him tumbling backwards. As both kids managed to regain their feet and proceed with the spar, their referee/babysitter Kakashi sat lazily on a large rock nearby and smiled behind his mask at his two charges. Both kids were testaments to their family's capabilities. He had no doubt it wouldn't be long before they were advancing through the ranks as fully fledged shinobi. He hoped to end up as their sensei when they did. This year would be his first outside of ANBU since before the two were born, and he knew Minato planned to begin having him testing genin hopefuls for a new generation of Team 7 soon. He just hoped he convinced Minato that he would do a better job than Itachi as their sensei. He had no illusions that Itachi hoped to get all three of his siblings on one team and convince them into cooperating better. However, Kakashi had peeked in on the three little brats interacting. They were like oil and water. Itachi had no chance of getting the three of them to get along. It would be even harder after tonight, Kakashi figured. After all, after tonight Sasuke would be an orphan and 2/3 of the Uchiha would be dead at the hands of their three most promising younger clansmen. Itachi, Shursui, and Izumi were all to eliminate Fugaku, his wife, and the elders and shinobi of the clan who had helped to plan a proposed attempt on Kushina and Minato's children. The 3 young Uchiha had come to Minato within the last few weeks to tell him of their clansmen's intent to kidnap and use Kushina and the children against him. Minato had tried for weeks prior to that to try and talk things out with the Uchiha who had begun to withdraw from the village at large. This was the last straw though. Threats to his village and even worse threats to his family would not be tolerated. While Hiruzen might have made a final attempt at negotiate, or some other such method, but Minato planned for his 3 double agents to first eliminate Fugaku, and the elders then placed Hiraishin seals across the compound so he could help them crush the other conspirators wholesale. Kakashi knew that after tonight, things were going to be quite different. He just hoped that the rest of the Uchiha learned from the mistakes of those slated to die. Repeating such folly, especially after Minato had told him he had intended to begin grooming Itachi as the 5th Hokage, would do nothing but result in more death for them. Perhaps some traitors would have to be killed by his own hands in the future if they tried again. That thought saddened him as it felt like he would be spitting on Obito's sacrifice. Kashi and I, where is Itachi and I? He better not be helping that brat Sasuke train instead of us, Masaki said with a scowl, causing Kakashi to sigh slightly at the girl. She had a special dislike of Sasuke for the way he stole some of their shared brother's attention. Now, Saki-chan, you know as well as I do that Itachi is fair to both you and Sasuke with his time. He's either on a mission or taking care of things for your dad, I imagine. Kakashi replied, getting the girl to cross her arms and pout cutely. Man, everybody is so tense and busy with Kushimama having a baby. Not to mention it's really boring with everyone gone. I kinda wish we could have gone with them, Naruto commented as he plopped down onto the ground. I wish they took us to the hospital with them. I want to see the baby as soon as possible, Masaki said. Kakashi chuckled and opened his mouth to reply, only to freeze momentarily before turning his head in the direction of the western quadrant of the village. He couldn't say exactly what it was, but something ominous caught his attention. As the sensation intensified quickly but still subtly, he turned fully. The presence, or whatever it was quickly blossoming in intensity, as soon both Naruto and Masaki were also intently staring in the same direction. By now the hair on Kakashi's neck was on end and he felt his blood quickening as if his body was entering into its fight or flight response of its own volition. Stay close to me, he said to the children. He didn't know what was happening, but the feeling, coupled with the fact that it lay in the same direction as the Uchiha district, had him on edge. He would protect the kids with his life, but he couldn't shake the dread swelling up inside him. Just as he was about to tell the children to come closer to him so they would be within arm's reach should something happen, that something did happen. A flash just to their right and Minato appeared holding Kushina, looking much worse for wear. Grabbing onto his shoulder, and standing beside him was Mikoto, who looked half panicked and frenzied. The last member of the little group was a tiny blonde baby held safely in Mikoto's arms. As Minato carefully laid Kushina on the ground, Naruto and Masaki scrambled over to their family while Kakashi stood frozen at the sight of some puncture wound on Minato's leg. It was bleeding badly, but he seemed to be ignoring it in favor of his family for the time being. Minato wasted no time as he planted a kiss, first on Kushina's lips then on Mikoto's. He gently brushed his newborn's head before laying his hands on the shoulders of his older children and giving them a squeeze. Without a word he stepped away from his kids with a sad smile and disappeared once more in a flash. Dad, the 2 children cried out as he teleported. Kakashi moved forward to help Mikoto and Kushina, however he could only to once again freeze in place as a new feeling of dread and terror washed over the whole village. In an explosion of smoke and debris, the form of the massive Kyuubi rising to its full height over the village, resting directly on top of what once was the Uchiha clan compound. The group could only stare in horror at the towering monster as it let loose a roar that seemed to shake the world itself. 9 gigantic tails whipped about, cleaving furrows into the village and undoubtedly killing dozens or more. Kyuubi, Kakashi whispered faintly in terror at the sight. He never imagined seeing such a thing in person, even from this far away. Kakashi, help me get Kushina and the baby inside. We'll be safer behind the other barriers, Mikoto said to her husband's protege. Right, kids, give us a hand here, Kakashi commanded. Both children snapped to it and began helping him get Kushina comfortably situated into the Silverette's arms. As the small group turned to move toward the family estate, the outermost perimeter flashed a warning briefly, and the ANBU masked Itachi landed beside them. Kakashi and Mikoto frowned at the prodigy's status. He was covered in a thin layer of dust, probably from the clouds of dust being created by the Kyuubi's rage. Here and there lines of blood soaked through the thin powder. Tears in his uniform and straining skin around his eyes showing he was fighting back tears told the both that every stage of their plan for tonight had gone off the rails. At least whatever it was that the Uchiha hoped to accomplish had backfired as well. Please take him, Itachi rasped out. His throat was a little hoarse from overusing multiple fire-style jutsu to overpower the other Uchiha clansmen earlier. Sadly, it did nothing in the end as the Kyuubi literally crushed the entire clan, including Shursui and Izumi, under its paws and tails. What? Naruto asked bluntly. Though it did fit the situation well. Everything on this night seemed insane at the moment. I need you to take Sasuke. Actually more than that, Naruto, Masaki, look at me. I need you to promise me something. Itachi said, getting their attention. They could only watch as his eyes seemed to spin before they grew suddenly woozy and grasped at their heads, whimpering lightly with the pain of new headaches. While the little ones were distracted, Itachi turned to Kakashi and Mikoto and frowned sadly at his family. The one that loved him as much as he did them. There was no reason to push yourself so far, Itachi. You've only just gotten the Manjikyu and using it so soon like that, Mikoto said in worry for her son. It's fine, it had to be done. Everything we planned went wrong though. Sure, Sui and Izumi are dead and so is the rest of the clan, but some people saw me killing off a couple of fleeing elders and now the plan has changed. I've made Sasuke see a version of me murdering members of the clan and now Naruto and Masaki are taken care of too. Itachi summed up quickly as he worked to clean himself briefly. Itachi Mikoto started only for her son to shoot her a rare smile. It has to be this way. Take care of my little siblings please mom, senpai take care of our family. Itachi said before rushing off. Kakashi sighed sadly as Mikoto fought back her tears. This night was a nightmare made real for her. Or more like every nightmare she'd had combined in one. Kakashi vowed silently to his younger brother in all but blood that he would take care of their family. After all, blood or not, this was Kakashi's family as much as it was Itachi's. As he sped away from where every other shinobi of Konoha was headed, Itachi couldn't help but wish a different outcome had been available. However, despite knowing his 3, now 4, beloved siblings would come to hate him for what had happened tonight, he also knew that it was in his family's interest that they remain clear of any part in the near extinction of the Uchiha. Back with the others, Naruto and Masaki had finally regained full power over their senses and were frustrated and confused, not to mention terrified, as they could only stare at the building ball of powerful chakra in the Kyuubi's maw. As the ball of blackened chakra was launched, it suddenly seemed to have the world itself wrap around it before suddenly appearing miles away in the deepest parts of the forest and detonating. A bright flash of light, their first sign before the world seemed to quake from the power of the blast. After he cleared his head, Naruto turned to Kakashi with narrowed eyes. Why did Itachi attack you and Miko mama? Why would he try to kill Sasuke? He loved him. Kakashi and Mikoto shared a look, realizing that Itachi had used a genjutsu to put a false memory in both kids' minds. Looking back at the frightened looks of the kids, he felt the urge to cry at the stress of the whole situation. To think that less than 5 minutes beforehand he had been simply enjoying watching the two kids practice on their combat skills. Now he was lying to them to back up Itachi's ruse. Talk about it while we get these 3 inside where it's a little safer. Mikoto cut in. Right. Kakashi said as he slung Sasuke over his shoulder and gently shook Kushina to try and wake her. As she came to, the woman blinked in confusion for a moment before her eyes widened and she tried to move to her feet immediately. Damn it! She hissed. It felt like her entire body was trampled and submerged in scalding water. Where is Kid? She demanded after realizing she couldn't get to her feet on her own. She's here, Kushina, I have her. She's fine. Mikoto soothed as she stepped over along with Naruto and Masaki. Thank Kami. Naruto, Masaki? What are you two doing? How did we get back to the estate? She asked while finally taking in their environment. This was quickly followed by a horrified expression when she saw the Kyuubi on its rampage in the distance. I couldn't stop him, she muttered quietly. A sense of self-loathing and defeat settled in her chest. The Kyuubi was her duty, even if she'd never asked for it, and it had escaped and was destroying Konoha. Ma, no! It's not your fault. I don't know what happened, but that's not your fault, Masaki insisted as she and Naruto helped her slowly to her feet. Kushina said nothing but simply grimaced in pain as she finally stood. Both Naruto and Masaki had been trusted around a week ago with the knowledge of the seal and Kyuubi. They weren't told the full details, like the fact that her seal would weaken in childbirth, or that Kushina wouldn't actually be giving birth at the hospital but in a secluded spot fortified deep within the Land of Fire's forests. The group struggled toward the house only to stop at the doorway when they watched Minato and the Toad boss Gamabunta attack the Kyuubi and subsequently disappear in a sudden flash. Teleporting something so large with him will have taken a lot of his chakra. He is probably running low by now, Kushina said in worry. Her mind ran through scenarios to figure out the best way to stop the Kyuubi. Her mind settled on a few, but only one was acceptable to her. Glancing at her children, Kakashi included, and her lover, she couldn't help but feel the grief build in her chest. She would convince Minato to reseal it into her, and she would die taking the Kyuubi with her, buying Konoha and their family time. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the alternative. Whoever it was the Uchiha had contracted to help them seemed intent on getting the Kyuubi for his own purposes, if the monologue he was intent on giving as he ripped Kyuubi out of the seal was anything to go off of. As if on quest the thought of having him reseal the Kyuubi into her, Minato suddenly appeared before his family. He looked serious, more severe than ever they had seen him. Kushina noticed his sad eyes turn to the baby in Mikoto's arms, and immediately her protective nature reared up in defiance of what he planned. The two young children weren't sure why, but they stepped between Minato and their new baby sister, causing his eyes to widen briefly before a bittersweet expression crawled onto his face. Reaching forward, he drew both into a hug and felt pride and grief war within his mind. Realizing what had just happened, both Mikoto and Kushina gasped before reaching out toward the father, and his two children crying out for him to wait. He was gone before the words fully left their mouths. "No! Minato, come back! Seal it back into me!" Kushina screamed out to the wind. It was too late, of course. He was gone, and she knew what he planned for the children. Minato appeared standing over a kunai he had stabbed into the ground earlier. Masaki and Naruto were each held in one of his arms, slightly woozy from the sudden transport. As that cleared away, they were shocked to see the massive Kyuubi restrained by glowing purple torii gates and Gamabunta holding its mouth closed. "Minato, whatever you are planning, you had best hurry it up. The fox will break free soon," the Toad Boss shouted. "I only need a few moments more," he hollered back before setting his children onto the ground and kneeling down to eye level with them despite the pain of his injuries from doing so. "Kids, I have to do something that you two may come to hate me for, and for that, I'm so sorry." Minato began getting slow nods from his children. They knew the gist of what was about to happen. After all, they were far more knowledgeable of sealing than any other kids their ages. "I want you both to know I love you with every bit of my heart, and if I thought there was a better solution," he trailed off with a sigh. "Dad?" Naruto began, only to be silenced by a tight hug from his father, as the man swept him and his sister into his arms. Minato stood back then and began weaving a quick series of hand signs. For the first time, both children noticed they stood at the center of an array of seals covering nearly the whole clearing. Now those seals glowed in ethereal blue and white as Minato channeled the last of his chakra into the seal. Suddenly, pain impacts both children in their very cores. Runes and symbols seemed to magically crawl up their legs and across their bodies before swirls grew onto their stomachs and began sizzling as if burning into their very body. Both children collapsed at the sudden pain, not able to witness the great Kyuubi dissolve into a red mist and fade into the array they laid at the center of. As they began to lose consciousness, the last thing either child saw was their father collapsing to a knee with tears running down his face as he finished his series of hand seals and pressed his hands to each of their stomachs, twisting slightly as if sealing a jar. With Naruto and Masaki unconscious, and Gamabunta taking the key to their seals to be held with the Toad Clan, Minato used the remnants of his chakra to flash back to his family. Upon reaching them, though, the Shinigami claimed his soul upon landing. His last sight of the living world was of Mikoto and Kushina hovering over their children weeping, and Kakashi doing his best to watch over all 5 of the vulnerable figures and also check on Minato. "Watch out for one another, please," he muttered, only just loud enough for his wives and ward to hear him. As he passed, his newborn daughter Kiruzumaki, blonde-haired and blue-eyed just like her father, finally woke up and began loudly crying. Chapter 1. Graduation. Walking to the academy, as they normally did, Naruto and Masaki held their little sister's hands on either side of her. Kid had grown into the spitting image of her father by the time she had reached 5. Her blonde hair was almost always in a sort of wild crown, and her baby blue eyes had people practically become putty in her tiny little hands. Whether the little girl realized it or not, she was the light that kept her family above the darkness that seemed to always be waiting for them. With the loss of Minato and Itachi's betrayal, the family had been run through the metaphorical ringer. Mikoto had tried to interact and be open with Sasuke and the village, but the suspicion from being Itachi's mother and an Uchiha led her to be treated with absolute disdain from Sasuke and wariness from Konoha. She had found it was best that she not be seen publicly with the children too often, something Naruto and Masaki vehemently disagreed with. With Mikoto practically locked away in the family estate, it fell heavily on Naruto and Masaki to escort Ki to and fro throughout the village. The little girl didn't know anything was wrong. Kushina was increasingly busy running the sealing core of the village, and while she spent all her free time with Mikoto and the children, she sadly got little more than a few hours in the evenings to do as she pleased. Naruto and Masaki's existence as Jinchuriki had also darkened the family's world. They weren't spat on or treated poorly. After all, they were the beloved 4th Hokage's children. That didn't mean their mere existence frightened some people. Civilians and some of the shinobi most affected by that night kept them at arm's length now. Kid was oblivious to this. All she knew was her loved ones all held a certain feeling of melancholy about them, not that she knew that word, and she assumed it was due to the death of her father. She never knew him, though she did miss him as much as any child who had lost a parent would. Her bubbly and kind personality brightened up the rest of the family's lives, though. It was because of the girl's infectious spirit that the trio was all smiles. While there were times they had trouble dealing with the results of that night, the 3 siblings buckled down and became closer rather than allowing such troubles drive them apart. Especially Naruto and Masaki. They had become very overprotective of their little blonde sister, and were themselves inseparable. Keed would never know her father that she was the spitting image of. She was told stories of the man and treated like the princess of Konoha, essentially Tsunade 2.0. However, there was an emptiness. No amount of stories or adoration from the village could replace a father. She didn't complain though. Not once. At least not about that. Do I really have to go to class? She asked her siblings, sending them both the heartbreaking puppy dog eyes. Naruto began to waver, only for his sister to step in. She wasn't truly invulnerable to her baby sister's act, but the Ravenet used the same tactics on their brother to get her way as well. It would take something more than that to sway her. Keed, you have to. I thought you wanted to become a kunoichi like me? Masaki asked. You're not a kunoichi yet. The little girl pouted. Masaki shot a slight glare toward her sister, sending the girl skittering behind Naruto. The red-headed boy sighed as his sisters began their playful squabbling. They meant nothing by it. If anything, it was a morning ritual between them, and he always ended up dragged into the middle of it. The boy tried not to snicker as the little blonde stuck her head out from behind her makeshift human shield and stuck her tongue out at the older girl. Little brat. Masaki playfully growled as she shoved Naruto out of the way and scooped the girl up and began peppering her with kisses and tickling her. Keed squealed and giggled as her sister played with her. Seeing the two of them like that brought a full-blown smile to Naruto's lips before he sadly had to break up the little game. It wouldn't do for them to be late. Especially today. It didn't take long for the trio to reach the academy. Naruto and Masaki dropped Keed off to her teacher. The same one that had taught them as first years. Tsubaki looked at her two former students with an expression filled with a storm of complex conflicting emotions. The two older children didn't dwell too much on it. They knew that a lot of shinobi had lost their families that night, and the usual cautious nature of a good ninja made them a little wary around the children. Tsubaki was better than that though, and gave all three children a small hug before she took Keed off to class. The older siblings watched as they went for a moment before turning to head up the stairs to their own classroom. It didn't take long to reach the room. The lack of chatter was enough for them both to recognize that Irika had already arrived. They weren't late yet, but still braced themselves for the overly strict teacher's attention. As they opened the door, the man simply watched them move to their seats. He wasn't overly harsh with Naruto and Masaki, and he didn't single them out, but they could tell he was not fond of them either. He was even less fond of Sasuke, and he held some form of reflectance with each of the clan heirs. Instead, he was biased in favor of the civilian-born students, something that was almost unheard of in any hidden village. The fact that his favorite student, Sakura, was within their circle of friends was enough for Naruto and Masaki to excuse his bias. After all, it was kind of refreshing that the man didn't care about the QB inside them, but instead that they had so many advantages over their fellow students. As they found their seats, their friends greeted them. Hinata greeted Naruto warmly while simply glancing in Masaki's direction, while the others gave their own characteristic hellos. Excited to come in second and third place after me in the exam? Kiba asked with a playful smirk. TCH, Inuzuka, they are the best in class after that prick Uchiha. If Lord Third hadn't put that restriction on age in place after the traitor, they would have been out of the academy years ago. Ino pointed out snidely. Shut up, you fangirls trash. I'm at least gonna whoop your ass. Kiba snarled. Please, dead last. I bet you don't even graduate. All you have going for you is the spar, and everybody but Choji and Shika will beat you there. Hinata chimed in, causing the boy to develop a pained look. It was pretty common knowledge that Kiba had an intense crush on the Hyuga heiress. The issue was that Hinata only had eyes for one boy, and that was most definitely Naruto. She hadn't been too mean in trying to let the Inuzuka down at first, but by now the Hyuga princess had had enough. She took nearly any chance she could get to put the boy down, and still he remained interested in her like a loyal dog. Kiba further deflated as Hinata moved to sit uncomfortably close to Naruto's left side, as his right was taken by Masaki, who glared at the arrogant brat of the Hyuga clan who seemed to think Naruto was her personal property. Sit somewhere else, Hyuga. Masaki growled. There was a very brief moment where Hinata glared back before the Hyuga heiress released a scoff and returned to her seat between Ino and Sakura. Both girls looked a little awkward. They had remained friends with Masaki but had also found themselves as Hinata's clique during their years in the academy. Despite that, everyone knew that Masaki had Hinata beat, and wasn't afraid to literally beat her to get a point across. Kushina had made sure all three of the children were more than willing to use their hands to get what they wanted. It had worked for her normally after all. Slipping into the free seats, I sent the siblings a faint smile and turned his attention to the front of the class. The Shimura boy continued to be an odd one. His demeanor was friendly enough, but he seemed more than hesitant to grow close to anyone. As if he was afraid to. All right, everyone, glad you are all here. Irika said flatly as he stared out at the class. The academy curriculum had changed heavily from when Irika had been in it a few years prior. He had been 2 years from graduation when the QB attack had occurred and remembered how much fun things had seemed. Now, though, things felt far more serious and rigid, and the young teacher had developed a more rugged facade to go with it. He saw the students through to graduation. The ones a single step away from becoming soldiers, and he refused to simply butter up generation after generation of fodder. It was why he showed some special treatment to the civilian students, like his favorite student, Sakura. The girl was third among the females and seventh overall, and was civilian born and raised. His tone shifted to a softer one for the whole class as he thought not only of Sakura but all of them proceeding on into the brutal realities of their profession. He could stop pushing them. Today was their exam and the last day he had any control over their safety and continued life. A few students she hoped actually failed somehow. Not because he wanted them to do poorly, but because he'd rather they not go on to be soldiers of the Hidden Leaf. In the end, though, his duty was to train and test these young shinobi and kunoichi, and the time for the second half of that mission was here. The final exam. I wish you all luck and hope for your success. The first years will be starting transformation training this afternoon, so we will get the jutsu portion of the test out of the way first. We will start alphabetically. Shino Abirame, follow me. With that, the young man led the first of his students down the hall to the seal-reinforced room to demonstrate his abilities. One by one the students returned and called out the next student to be tested. Naruto was a bit exasperated that he would be among the last names called, but kept his complaints to a minimum. He would have to sit and wait the same amount of time either way. Finally Masaki was called, and after sharing a brief glance with her brother and her friends she started off to the room. It was a short walk, but that was a small mercy. She wasn't sure why she suddenly felt so nervous. She had maintained the top kunoichi since her first year, with her only real competition being Hinata. However, Hinata had never been all that close to taking the position from the Namikaze heiress. She was simply above the competition. Stepping into the room, Masaki took calming breaths as her mother had taught her to while making her way to the center of the room. Iruka finished writing something and greeted her, though she found she instinctively answered rather than actually comprehended the question. Her mind instead focused on her mother's words from back when she began teaching her fire techniques. Stable breath, stable body, stable mind, stable chakra. It all starts with a calm, stable breath, darling. Mikoto's loving voice whispered into her ear. Alright, Masaki, let's begin with the transformation, shall we? Iruka asked, getting a nod as his response. Transform into the third Hokage, please. Iruka commanded, and Masaki made the hand sign, easily transforming with a small burst of smoke revealing the wizened Hiruzen Sarutobi. Iruka nodded, grading the performance and realism of the transformation. It was easily the second best transformation he had seen so far. Well done, next is the clone jutsu. 3 is enough to ace this portion. Without even breaking the transformation, 5 clones appeared before the instructor, each with the perfect appearance of the third Hokage. More than excellent. You can release both jutsu now, Masaki. Iruka said as he pointed to a log leaning against the far wall. Substitute with that, and you will have passed the basic 3, and your elective jutsu will be all that's left. Once more Iruka was unsurprised as the girl easily replaced herself with the log and back again. By now most students would be huffing for breath and heavily sweating. Masaki was proving her remarkable reserves by not looking even slightly bothered. Masaki paused briefly for the Dijin jutsu. She had known she would use a fire jutsu for some time, but was somewhat concerned that Sasuke was thinking along the same lines. She shook the thought from her mind, though. Despite that desire to appear completely separate from Sasuke, she had no need to worry about her grade being affected. She still wanted to do better than him, though. Settling on a jutsu that would leave her plenty in the tank for the taijutsu exam still to come, Masaki ran through a set of hand signs before finishing with a total sign and pressing her lips together, as if she was blowing a kiss. A burst of flame sprang into existence just past her lips and swirled into a single tall pillar of fire. The inferno was easily double the width and height of the average person as it spun faster and hotter as more chakra and fire was poured into the technique by Masaki. Slowly she eased off on the chakra fueling the attack, and the flames rolled before dissipating in a black smoke and faded entirely. Thanks to the seals plastered across every surface of the room, the building didn't hold a single scratch from Masaki's technique. Excellent, Masaki. What was the name of that one? Iruka asked. It's my mother's trademark jutsu. Burning Storm. It's a low B rank because it takes time for the flame to spiral up, but I want to make a faster version that will be an A rank. Masaki responded with cheer. She was more than happy with the apparent pass from her teacher. No doubt you will. You can go, Masaki. Send in Junko Natsunuma, please. Iruka said as he scribbled some notes. The Namikaze girl was quick to make her way back to the classroom and called out the next girl for the exam. As she was the normally more reserved of the Uzumaki Namikaze duo, she couldn't help but grimace at the teasing look Naruto was sending her, as she nearly skipped back to her desk. I don't even need to ask, do I? Naruto joked as he smiled to his sister. The Ravenette put on a false arrogant sneer. She scoffed and flipped her long hair over her shoulder. The girl held the pose for a moment before breaking into excited giggles. It was easy. She grinned at the redhead. Well, for me it was. You might need to worry. Right. Naruto laughed lightly as a depressed-looking student returned and sent the next on the list to the instructor. Soon Sasuke was called forward and the boy stood up silently and stalked out of the room, ignoring all of those around him. Had he looked back, he would have no doubt sent glares to Naruto and Masaki as they sent him slightly pitying glances. They didn't like him by any stretch of the imagination, however the wariness that the two of them were treated with now was far worse for Sasuke. Between the psychotic elder brother, rumors of Uchiha madness, more rumors of Sharingan in the Kyuubi's eyes, and yet even more rumors of some sort of Uchiha conspiracy that never came to fruition, Sasuke was considered by a great many within Konoha as a stain on the village. That stain bore a powerful bloodline though. So just as many, if not more people than were disgusted with the Uchiha scion's residence in the village wanted him placed under a similar contract to what Naruto and his late father had been. After all, worry that the Sharingan could go extinct with only 3 people in the village possessing it and 2 of the 3 being women of the Namikaze clan, Sasuke was a valuable asset. The little shit was still a rude brat though. A fact that Naruto and Masaki were reminded of as he strode back into the room and simply grunted out Uzumaki as if the mere word burned his tongue. Sasuke received the pity of the siblings, though not enough that they weren't scowling down at him as he retook his seat for his usual attitude. Well, wish me luck, Masaki, Naruto said with an exhale of breath. Sure, but you don't need it. Just hurry up. I want to get to the rest of the exam already, Masaki said with a confident look sent her brother's way, causing him to fire back a corny thumbs up in response. Like Masaki, Naruto had no trouble at all with the basic 3 jutsu. Had he not gotten early training or known how to control his chakra prior to becoming a Jinchuriki, he might have had issue with the clone jutsu. But the fact that his chakra was imbalanced toward yang energy was much less of a problem than it could have been had he not been prepared. Excellent job so far, Naruto. Show me what you've got for your elective, Iruka said calmly, though he had been relatively pleased with the results so far. Those he felt were ready were passing easily enough, while those that he hoped to remain behind another year or more had almost all already failed to meet the requirements. With the few students left, he not only had no doubt in their passing, but that they were ready for what was to come. It brightened his mood considerably more than what Naruto could admit being used to from the man. Yes, sensei, Naruto said before he tossed off the jacket he had been wearing. Iruka was a bit surprised but let it pass as the boy seemed to brace himself in a stable stance. The reason why Naruto had discarded his jacket became clear soon after that. While it was clear the technique would eventually reach a point that he could keep his outerwear on without damaging it, as it was the constructs of chakra that formed close to his body that began to appear only slightly past his shirt. Soon 7 thick chakra chain constructs twisted and coiled as if possessing a mind of their own. One wrapped around and lifted the log used for substitution, while the rest began to form a faint blue barrier between them, creating chakra-powered walls. Iruka nearly jolted in his seat when the one lifting the log had stopped what it was doing to lightly coil around his arm. Rather than fight it, the instructor allowed his student to continue showing off his technique, and Iruka gasped slightly as he felt his chakra become suppressed in the appendage that had been ensnared by the chains. Immediately after that, Naruto released the technique, and like his sister earlier, looked as fresh as could be. Iruka actually felt more drained than the Uzumaki likely did. While the chains hadn't siphoned his chakra, they had suppressed it, and having chakra suppressed and released in such a way was straining on the body in a particular way. He doubted that Naruto had known that, but Iruka could feel the fatigue, not only his arm but his whole being after the chains had done their work. Good job. Send in Ino when you get back to the room, Iruka commanded politely while he rubbed at his left arm. The chains left an odd sensation in it after they had left. Something unpleasant but not painful in any fashion. Naruto bowed respectfully as he left and was down the hall to the class quickly before sending info in. The blonde looked nervous but calmed down with Naruto's slight comforting. All the cheer that Masaki had at seeing her brother's happy face and knowing he had passed the first portion of the exam evaporated. She didn't hate any of the girls in her class, though an argument could be made that Hinata Hyuga was an exception to that rule, but she had slowly grown more and more standoffish with some of them. Always when concerning Naruto. She wasn't stupid, and she knew of the eventual expectations placed on Naruto to take multiple spouses. However, she couldn't stop the irritation that bled into her heart every time Sakura or Ino, or Kami forbid Hinata were close to Naruto, whether physically or emotionally. Naruto had even stopped bringing up any other girls besides their mothers and sister because he knew it would put her in a bad mood. As he approached his seat, Naruto's smile dipped as he saw the look Masaki was giving Ino's back as the blonde left. He narrowed his eyes at his sister and lightly flicked her ear, causing her to squawk and clutch the side of her head while shooting a glare at him. Masaki, she's your friend and she's nervous about the exam, he said with a rare serious expression. The Namikaze scowled briefly before her eyes softened and darkened in equal measure. He was right. She always hated to admit that, and now she felt guilty for her attitude toward Ino. So to try and make up for it, Masaki mentally reprimanded herself and determined to give Ino plenty of support when she returned. It didn't take long. As she passed by Masaki's desk, the Jinchuriki reached out and gave her friend's hand a squeeze and smiled at her. "No sweat, right?" she asked. Ino hesitated only briefly before a confident smile sprung onto her face. "Yeah, no sweat. Who do you think I am? Kiba? What the hell is your problem with me, woman?" Kiba blurted out from across the room. "The same as everyone else's problem." Ino scoffed while flipping her hair over her shoulder. The girls, including Sakura and Hinata, giggled at that. Kiba often found himself the target of their teasing when they weren't out for one another. "Alright everyone, find your seats. We have the written exam and spars left, and I want to try and get everything done before lunch. Understood?" Iruka called out, getting a round of yes sensei from the class. As he handed out the paper, his thoughts centered on the discussion over the weekend with the Hokage and the expectant senseis for this year's graduates. While it was still just a rough draft, the teams were organized prior to the exam based upon skill and compatibility. A lot of work went into deciding who worked best where and with whom as their teacher. There were 3 students per team, and each teacher had a specialty that made it even more complex, as each individual had to be weighed against the team as a whole before they were assigned there. Thankfully, this year the passes and failures were more clear from the beginning, and Iruka doubted any last-minute tweaks would be needed to the teams. They were already breaking some old traditions, but it was fine as long as the teams were effective. As he watched the students work away at their tests, he doubted they could be anything but effective. They had a total of an hour to complete the test, but the group finished with roughly 15 minutes left to spare. That was fine with Iruka. The faster they could get everything done, the better. "Let's head outside to the sparring rings. Some younger students will be watching, so make sure you represent yourselves and the village as best as you can. You're testing to become shinobi. It's important you set good examples for your juniors as part of that." Iruka lectured as the class stood. When they arrived at the training yard, all but the first years were present to watch them spar. Naruto and Masaki were a little disappointed that they couldn't show off in front of Ki, but rather easily focused on the situation at hand. A few others from their class seemed to have become far more nervous due to the fact that they had an audience. A large one at that. "Okay, so for a treat for the younger kids and to give some of you multiple chances to get a better grade, I have decided with the other teachers to run this exam as a sort of tournament. I already have the bracket written out, so let's begin," Iruka called out. The younger kids buzzed with excitement. Whispered chatter and little fingers pointing at the better-known students. Much of the attention rested on Naruto, Masaki, Sasuke, and Hinata. They were the heirs to the most famous Konoha families after all. Even younger children had heard of them. First up, Naruto Uzumaki and Kota Katsuragi. Iruka called out. The 2 boys entered the circle. Kota on edge and Naruto calm and confident. Kota came from a civilian family of bakers but had done well compared to most other civilian children. Sadly for him, Naruto was not a civilian child. "Alright, taijutsu only, and you will stop when I call the fight or your opponent submits. Perform the sign of confrontation and begin," Iruka called. The boys did just that before Naruto blared toward the civilian boy faster than he could defend himself. The children, excluding the graduating class who had seen it before, gasped and watched as Naruto easily landed 5 lightning-quick blows on Kota before easily sliding under a wild hook and landing 3 more fast, powerful jabs up the length of the boy's arm. Kota hissed as he tried to backpedal away from Naruto, but the Uzumaki was much faster than him. Naruto circled around the boy and landed a couple more strikes across his back before sweeping Kota's legs out from under him and dropping him like a sack of rocks. The moment Kota dropped, Naruto was on top of him, ready to land even more painful strikes, this time to the other boy's face. "That's enough. Naruto wins," Iruka called out, and Naruto froze. The redhead hopped up and helped the civilian boy to his feet and out of the ring as the audience clapped and cheered. The next pair of children entered and the tournament continued on. The first round for the boys was as Naruto expected. He personally had a bye round for the second. Kiba narrowly beat Choji, only because the bigger boy yielded. Sai beat Shikamaru after a short bout that surprised most of the class that knew the Nara tended to simply forfeit fights. Naruto could tell he did just enough to get a pass though. Shikamaru was always holding something in reserve. Sasuke defeated Shino, which wasn't surprising. He then completely crushed his civilian opponent in the next round. For the girls, Ino and Sakura had been closely matched, but Sakura proved just slightly more physically stronger and flexible than Ino had been and pulled out a victory. As Masaki and Yakumo Kurama entered the ring, Naruto and many others couldn't help but feel it was a very unfair matchup. Masaki was the top kunoichi while Yakumo was extremely skilled in genjutsu and information gathering. She was arguably one of the worst in taijutsu. As the fight began, However, Yakumo shifted into a stance neither her opponent nor her teacher had seen before. Along the sidelines, though, Hinata took in a gasp of breath and surprise before smirking at the fact Masaki could potentially be caught off guard and even lose the fight now. As the pair made the confrontation sign and launched into their fight, the Namikaze heiress soon found the Kurama heiress almost impossibly flexible. She maneuvered and danced around every attack launched by Masaki, and it was beginning to shift the dark-haired girl's emotions from surprise to irritated. As if realizing that for herself, Yakumo suddenly counterattacked and landed a blow on Masaki's shoulder. It was weak, but had Masaki not dodged to the left slightly, it would have struck her precisely in the throat. Masaki leapt backward at that, deciding she needed to reevaluate the girl. As she did so, her eyes widened, seeing that even though she had avoided every blow, Yakumo was in far worse shape than Masaki was. She was a frail girl, and against a normal opponent her age, her method of avoidance and striking vulnerable points would tire her out but leave her with victory over her opponent. It was unfortunate for her that her opponent ended up being Masaki. She simply was too well conditioned and had too much speed and stamina to be defeated by the tactics Yakumo employed. You surely did enough to pass this part, Yakumo. Yield though, so it can save us both time and energy, Masaki suggested. The Kurama heiress simply clenched her teeth and wiped a sleeve across her brow to clear off the sweat. No, was all the answer Masaki got in return, and all she could do in response to that was sigh before launching her next attack. Yakumo was too tired to continue as she had before. Soon Masaki had landed a good punch on Yakumo's torso that had her curl up slightly in pain. It opened her up to a rain of blows from Masaki that peppered the girl's head and the rest of her upper body. Alright, Masaki wins, Irika called out as he stopped the fight. Masaki helped her opponent to her feet and led her off to the side. As a pair of civilian girls fought the other girls that Masaki typically associated with approached, and as a whole they asked how Yakumo was doing and if she had been hiding that new style this whole time. Irika paid attention to the fight to make sure everything went properly but listened to the conversation beside him as the popular girls chatted with one of the most antisocial of his students. He nearly smiled at that as he even heard the slightly embarrassed but happy tone in Yakumo's voice. After a couple of civilian fights, one of which ended in a disqualification of both students as they continued to fight after Irika had ordered them to stop, Hinata took to the ring against a civilian girl. Junko Natsunuma. Irika sadly noted in his mind that Junko was not going to pass anyway. She didn't have the chakra reserves for shinobi life. Less than half what Sakura Haruno had, and none of the girl's ridiculous level of control. It wasn't even really a fight. Hinata simply struck a point on the girl's back that induced severe pain, and the fight was over. The Hyuga tapped a couple of places on Junko afterward to stop the pain and also to relax her body, but the civilian girl was terrified of her now. Irika couldn't disagree. There was a certain amount of dread to be felt from every clan with special abilities. The Hyuga more than most. Junko simply got a very faint taste of that from her classmate. As they finished the first couple of rounds, Kiba and Sasuke found themselves facing off from one another. The Uchiha looked entirely bored of the situation, while the Inuzuka growled nearly as much as his partner. The fight went poorly for Kiba, though not as easily as Sasuke would have liked. The Inuzuka's aggressive tactics were turned back onto him by the Uchiha counter-focus style, but Kiba was far more durable than Sasuke had initially given him credit for. The fight continued longer than he would have liked to. For their audience, it was extremely fast and brutal. The strikes both boys landed thumped with painful sounds, causing some of the younger students to flinch. Neither Kiba or Sasuke did, though, as they continued to pound one another. Finally, a combo from Sasuke dropped Kiba into unconsciousness, and Irika called the match for the Uchiha. The boy checked that Kiba was alive and breathing but didn't help him back to his seat once he awoke. Thankfully, a couple of students a year younger than the graduating class helped him off to the infirmary to get checked over by the on-call medic Nin. The next pair to fight was Naruto and Sai. Both boys respectfully bowed their heads to one another, just enough to show respect but not enough to lose sight of their opponent. "This is much like the first school spar we had together," Sai commented. "Yeah, I guess it is. We're both very different than back then, though," Naruto said as he sped towards Sai. "True," Sai replied as he dodged around Naruto's brutally fast and powerful strikes. Sai had worked hard over the years to try and develop the durability needed to block or even simply resist Naruto's attacks. Sadly, it had been a pointless endeavor. He had realized at some point that Naruto's attacks were growing stronger and stronger as time wore on. So instead, he worked to become a master of evading the strikes entirely and waiting for a moment to retaliate. When Sai's fist split Naruto's lip for the first time, the stoic boy had nearly smiled. That is, until Naruto's movement sped up even more and became unpredictable. "Naruto, you idiot!" Masaki quietly scolded, though neither Naruto nor his opponent could hear her. The others around her could, though. "What do you mean, Masaki?" Sakura asked. "Our moms told us not to hold back today. I guess I'm just as bad as Naruto, but he should have known better against someone like Sai." Masaki answered. He has worked really hard to match with Naruto. Naruto is still ahead of him though. Sai is struggling now, Hinata said as they watched the fight continue on. Just as the Hyuga princess had said, Sai was beginning to truly struggle against Naruto now. More and more blows from Naruto found their marks, and just like the first, and every time since then that the two had fought, Sai's joints ached in agony. Soon he found he couldn't properly bend and twist away from Naruto's attacks as his muscles cramped up from the abuse. Naruto took advantage, landing a series of 15 total blows one after another as he circled Sai. The Shimura boy collapsed then as his legs locked up and couldn't carry on with the momentum of his upper body. As he hit the floor, Naruto hopped backward to give Irika space. The instructor moved forward and checked the downed boy to make sure he would be fine. In the end, some boys that had already been defeated in the tournament were drafted to carry Sai to the infirmary as well, though not before Naruto, and he had performed the unison sign and Sai had wished him luck. The last of the civilian-born students barring Sakura were soon driven out of the tournament. Naruto and Masaki tried to show interest but hadn't expected much from most of them. Soon though, Hinata and Masaki were squaring off against one another. Hinata was at a clear advantage, but thankfully the rules prevented her from injecting chakra from her fingertips. That didn't mean she couldn't easily target pressure points though. The girls circled one another cautiously before Hinata finally launched her opening assault. The flexibility of both girls was on full display, and the younger girls, especially Hinata's younger sister, were mesmerized, having discovered new role models. Hinata did manage to land a pair of strikes against Masaki, but in the end her success was her downfall as Masaki wrapped the smaller girl into a lock and began roughly beating on her. Irika called the fight soon after, and like a few others before her, the now bloodied Hinata was taken off to the infirmary to be treated by the medic ninja on staff. Now it was down to 4 students. Naruto and Sasuke for the boys and Masaki and Sakura for the girls. At least it was until the sight of Hinata's brutalized face had Sakura forfeiting without issue. Irika didn't really blame the girl. She was skilled, but her path up the bracket had been a far easier one than any of her remaining opponents had faced. Naruto, Sasuke, step up please, Irika called. The teacher was wary, and in fact the other teachers were also on edge. The two boys had been at each other's throats since before the academy, and their time here hadn't lessened that conflict in the slightest. If anything, they had grown more hateful of one another. The pair were rarely allowed to spar because they simply were too hard to control when they got into their bouts. Irika hoped today would be different, and the threat of a failure by disqualification would keep them in check. He was unaware that same thought was shared by an entire class and every teacher present. Alright boys. I've said it at the beginning of the fights, but as this is the last one of the day I will say it again. The implied "because you two can't control yourselves" was as loud unspoken as the words actually voiced were. Taijutsu only. You will cease the fight upon my command or the yielding of your opponent. No attempts to kill, maim, or otherwise cripple your opponent, Irika said, and the two boys nodded while they continued to glare at one another. At your ready, form the confrontation sign and begin, Irika called out, and the soon-to-be genin lifted their hands and made the signal for their duel. Both launched themselves forward afterward. The pop of forearms clashing and thump of shins crossing against one another could be heard just over the cheers of the audience of students and teachers. The fight grew fast and harsh, both boys landing serious blows before they jumped away from one another. Naruto was grinning wildly while Sasuke appeared more cold and hateful than most had seen him before. It wasn't new for Naruto though. He had gradually come to the conclusion that Sasuke was in fact his enemy. The boy was someone he pities, but that didn't make him any less of a prick or any less someone that Naruto wanted to beat to a pulp. The pair were soon at it again. Briefly they fought while strafing to the side, only to stop and begin more and more acrobatic movements as they battled. Finally, as Sasuke attempted a flip over Naruto to strike his back, the redhead dropped into an unorthodox position as if he was about to do a handstand push-up. With his arms, the Uzumaki launched himself like an oversized human arrow, feet first into the Uchiha's chest, sending the dark-haired boy skidding across the ring. Sasuke wasn't given a chance to recollect himself before Naruto was upon him. It was Naruto's turn to be caught off guard though, as Sasuke scored a powerful uppercut against his opponent's chin in the same motion he used to stand back up. As Naruto was thrown into a backward flip, Irika began preparing to intervene. This was getting to be too much for a pair of academy students, and he wanted to stop the fight before one of the boys became seriously hurt. Just as he opened his mouth to stop them though, Sasuke managed to weave around one of Naruto's attacks and land a lucky kick to the side of the redhead's temple. The Uzumaki skidded a ways before coming to a stop at the teacher's feet. Irika realized Naruto could likely go on, but both students were already beginning to resemble tenderized meat. Enough. Sasuke wins? Irika called for an end to the fight. A mixture of cheers and boos roared back while Irika had a couple teachers escort the two boys to the infirmary. He didn't think other students could keep the two from fighting if they chose to pick up where they left off. Thankfully, both Naruto and Sasuke were more concerned with passing and becoming fully fledged shinobi than beating on one another. As the latter would prevent the former, they let this one go for now. The class was released for lunch. Masaki collected both Kid and Naruto to sit together and eat. Kid was horrified at the sight of her brother, and worried over him throughout the whole meal. Much to Naruto and Masaki's humor as the little girl lectured him about not letting other people hit him, repeatedly telling him he was too fast for that so it shouldn't happen. Masaki backed her up every inch of the way with a teasing grin that caused Naruto to good-naturedly roll his eyes. After the meal, the children piled back into their classroom. Their friends all came to talk and prod Naruto much to his annoyance, or swoon over his skills and offer to help him if he was too sore, much to Masaki's annoyance. The pair were relieved when Iruka returned and began calling names of students to head up to another classroom for reassignment. As he read the list, those leaving and those staying had no certain way of knowing which was passing and which was failing. It became easier to figure out as the room grew emptier and emptier though. The remaining students were almost all clan children, with Sakura being the only real civilian student remaining by the end, and it was only once the rest of the class was gone that Iruka flipped to the next page on his clipboard. Congratulations to the rest of you. You have really impressed me and I'm happy to be the one to give you these headbands, Iruka said as he placed a scroll on his desk and a poof of smoke revealed several nearly stacked headbands engraved with the symbol of the Leaf Village. From now on though, I want you all to remember that you are shinobi and kunoichi of Konoha. Your lives and the lives of your comrades and loved ones will be in your hands. You will be expected to fight, kill, and even die for this village and country, so I want to say that I don't wish an easy life for you all, because you won't get it, but instead the strength to endure what will come to you. That is the true meaning of a shinobi. One who endures, Iruka said before he paused to let his words sink in. Alright, when I call your name and team, come up here to collect your headband, then sit with your teammates. Your sensei will arrive soon to pick you all up. The instructor finally began listing off the names. Team 7. Jonin Kakashi Hataki, first member Sasuke Uchiha. Second member Hinata Hyuga, final member Kiba Inuzuka. As Kiba silently celebrated and all three made their way up to the front of the room to collect their headbands, the Hyuga was fuming. Masaki smirked while Sakura and Ino sent their friend as pudding glance. Alright, let's see, next team is Team 8, Jonin is Karina Yuhi, team members are Yakumo, Masaki, and Shino, Iruka called out. Masaki froze and shit her brother a look, but the redhead was equally caught off guard. Neither of them had figured they could be split up. It had seemed impossible this entire time, but now, as it happened, they could do nothing but stare at one another. Masaki, Iruka called, and slowly the girl stood and made her way down to collect her headband while repeatedly sending glances back to Naruto. Team 10 is led by Jonin Asuna Sarutobi. His students will be Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akimichi. This team had no real issues. Clearly all three had expected this result, even if Ino had hoped a little deep down that she could end up on a team with her friends or with the boy she was interested in. Last one, Team 11 led by Aoba Yamashiro with Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, and Sai Shimura. The final team moved forward to collect their headbands and moved back to their new seats beside one another. Sakura was carefully avoiding the looks of Masaki and the majority of the other girls while trying not to blush at being placed on the same team as her crush and friend. Sai seemed indifferent on the outside but internally was pleased to be on a team with Naruto. He had come to respect the redhead greatly. He was the best to push himself against to make rapid progress in his own skills. Not to mention he was a friendly person, and Sai had found that he preferred outspoken and friendly people over his normal associates outside of the academy who rarely spoke and simply did as they were asked without the tracest amounts of emotion. Naruto was different from his two teammates. He had no issue with either of them and, if completely honest, got along with both of them. However, he was still caught up on the fact that he was not going to be serving as a genin alongside Masaki. It felt wrong. Completely so. As Iruka left and the senseis, bar one, filtered in, Naruto was adrift. He followed after Aoba and his teammates without really participating in the basic chatter that the rest of his new team had dipped into. When they finally stopped, having made it to the top of the Hokage monument, Naruto realized he couldn't remember a single thing that they had all talked about on their way here. Finally joining us, Naruto? Aoba asked him, getting Naruto to blush faintly, though he nodded. Like I already said while you weren't listening, there is a final test given by each jonin to decide if they will accept their new students. Ours will be on Training Ground 30 at 7 in the morning, but first I think it's important we get to know each other better. The jonin was friendly and casual enough, but Naruto had enough experience interacting with Kakashi to know that was a usual front that skilled shinobi like to use. This test he was talking about had probably already started, he just didn't want the genin to realize it. Maybe you should start, Aoba-sensei, we know each other a bit but we don't know you at all, Sakura said, getting an approving smile from their new teacher. Good idea. Well, you know my name, I am not a very complex person really. I'm loyal to my friends and the village, so be careful who you badmouth in front of me. I'm excited to be a sensei. This is my first time taking a batch of genin, but I hope to teach you guys quite a lot. I'm a jack of all trades shinobi, but my specialty has been a chakra manipulation technique that allows for a lot of different versatile uses, but what it is exactly will be a secret for now. How about you go next for us, Sakura? Aoba said as he nodded his head for Sakura to begin. I'm from a civilian family but have trained with the clan kids since starting out at the academy. I took medical training for electives and have really good control of my chakra. I struggle a bit with stamina but am making some progress there. I want to have a family someday, but one like me who want to be involved with the shinobi life. She looked like there was more she felt she could say, but Aoba let her keep her silence. That was more than enough information for an introduction. Very nice to meet you, Sakura. Sai, how about you go next? Aoba asked. Alright. I am Sai. My grandfather is Lord Shimura. I don't know my parents. I have a special set of training that allows me to use a unique weapon. I also like to paint. As Sai stopped there, Aoba had a hard time keeping his features placid as he tried to imagine what exactly was Sai's unique weapon. Thank you, Sai. Last but not least, Naruto. I have 2 mothers and 2 sisters. I like training and fighting. I like some gardening and cooking too. I am an Uzumaki, so I specialize in large amounts of chakra and seals, I guess. Naruto said. He still was somewhat distracted by the fact that Masaki wasn't nearby. Well, that's it for today. Why don't you all head home and rest up for tomorrow, because I won't be taking it easy on you guys. Aoba said, causing the children to nod and begin standing up. Make sure you are ready tomorrow, body and mind. Aoba gave one last suggestion with a pointed look at Naruto before he flickered away. Naruto huffed slightly before he headed home, while his teammates shared a worried glance before heading their own way home. Similarly to Naruto, Masaki was unfocused as she followed after Kurenai, Yakumo, and Shino. It was an odd reversal to the usually calm but open personality she possessed. Kurenai, unlike Aoba, didn't wait till they reached their destination to pull Masaki back into the present. However, she also didn't simply demand she show up for her test with her head on straight. Instead, Kurenai had seen how close the pair of Jinchuriki were. She'd been in Mikoto's squad as a genin, even though that had only been a few months before Mikoto retired to start a family. She still occasionally caught up with her old sensei. Kurenai had become one of the few lines of communication Mikoto had kept open with the village since the night of the Kyuubi attack. Masaki, I know you are upset about being separated from Naruto, but this is for your own good. You two are very strong, but you need to learn to be without one another. As shinobi, you're unlikely to be posted together usually. Kurenai explained. Masaki sagged slightly at that. Yes, sensei. That isn't to say you won't ever work together, and I can't imagine you two won't make up for lost time at home, the woman said with a knowing glance that caused Masaki to blush. While Masaki assumed it was a bit of an open secret that she and Naruto were a little closer than siblings typically were, no one brought such a subject up to her, barring a small handful of people. Kurenai happened to be one of them. She wasn't disapproving. If anything, the woman seemed to consider it cute or romantic. Others were less pleased, though again only a handful said so. Hinata being the one that came to mind, though her reasoning was different, as the Hyuga's father and mother were half-siblings as well. Here we go, Kurenai said as she gracefully settled into a bench in one of Konoha's nicest parks. Well, Yakumo and I quite literally lived together, and Masaki's mother was my sensei, meaning the only one here that doesn't really know me would be you. So I'll introduce myself, and we can go from there. Kurenai explained, getting a stoic nod from Shino. I'm Kurenai Yohi, pleased to be your Jonin sensei, and I have the full intent on helping each of you to become full-fledged and strong shinobi for our village. I have a few close loved ones that I hold in very high esteem for various reasons, an excellent little sister, and I specialize in genjutsu. Yakumo, take it from here, Kurenai said as she tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. The blushing girl smiled at Kurenai before mainly glancing at her new teammates. I'm Yakumo Kurama. I know we haven't really talked much, but I hope to get to know each other better. I like painting and spending time with my big sister. I actually specialize in genjutsu, but have been recently trying to build my body up to better handle taijutsu and ninjutsu. Yakumo fiddled slightly with her thumbs while Kurenai patted her on the shoulder. The Jonin nodded toward Shino, who adjusted his glasses and began. I'm Shino Abirame, an heir to my clan. I specialize in my clan's kinjutsu surrounding the hives of Kikeichu insects within our body. Due to these insects, I have low chakra reserves but extremely good sensory and control. I also find collecting rare species of insects an enjoyable hobby. Shino again adjusted his glasses once he finished speaking, unbothered by the stares from his new team. Thank you, Shino, that was very informative. Kurenai collected herself after the dry delivery of the boy's introduction and turned her stare into a warm smile. I guess that leaves me. I am Masaki Namikaze. I have the Sharingan bloodline, or at least I will. Just like my mother. My main interests are training and fighting, as well as my brother and sister. I guess I am just looking forward to working alongside all of you. Masaki said quickly, though she was honest. She did like who she was teamed up with. Yakumo was one of the few girls that had shown absolutely no interest in her brother over the recent years at the academy. Or any boy at all, really. Some of the meaner girls like Hinata or some of the civilian brats that failed had spread rumors that Yakumo liked girls anyway. There was less evidence of that than there was of her liking boys, though. Shino was a quiet but hardworking and smart boy. Masaki knew she could get along with him. She just had to be careful not to torch his bugs randomly. Lastly, her sensei was her favorite pick. After Kakashi, though she and Naruto had guessed correctly that Kakashi would be given Sasuke, so neither wanted to be on that team. She knew Kurenai not that well, but she still knew her somewhat. She was also one Konoha's prime female role models right after Masaki's own mother's. Excellent. Now that we know each other a little better, it's time I reveal the bad news. None of you are actually genin yet. Tomorrow morning I will give you my own exam, and if you pass you officially become my team. So be at training ground 24 at 5:30. With that, Kurenai, like every Jonin sensei finishing up their introductions, disappeared in a sudden burst of speed. Oh, well, I thought we would do something today. Well, either way, see you two tomorrow, Masaki said before turning and leaving herself. It didn't take long for her mind to wander back onto what her brother and little sister were up to at the moment. Mikoto sighed as she saw Kid race upstairs to get her training supplies. She had agreed that the little girl could train in the backyard as long as it was in sight of the kitchen windows. The Namikaze matriarch had to fetch the girl from the academy, with Naruto and Masaki having graduated and been with their senseis. She realized just how long it had been since she had done something like that. The glances her way and whispers among housewives hadn't bothered her in the past, but now it ate at her a little. The mind was often someone's worst enemy. It filled in what someone couldn't hear and made up hurtful, hateful rumors that Noon actually said in the first place. Mikoto's pain stemmed from the shame only a parent could feel in themselves. Her children each had such burdens placed on them, and it made her feel completely worthless as a mother more often than she felt like a success. Despite Kushina and the children arguing to the contrary. That shouldn't matter though, she decided. She had to put the thoughts about false rumors and judgmental women aside and return to the woman that had once been the proud and respected Mikoto Namikaze. Walking her precious daughter home from school was the first step in that. She only wished she had done so sooner for her elder children. Even her eldest child. While two of the children might not be her blood, they were all her family. As Kushina was swamped with her duty to Konoha, Mikoto needed to step up and be more than just a housewife. No matter how comforting it was to fall into a routine of cleaning and cooking. Miko mama, can you train with me? Kid asked, jerking the raven-haired woman free of her abyss-like thoughts. Mikoto began to decline the girl only to stop herself. The little blonde looked so adorable and simultaneously like her father. Mikoto couldn't. She couldn't even imagine saying no. Of course, my love, Mikoto said with a smile, causing the girl to jump a bit as she was suddenly swept up into a hug by her mother. She created a clone to handle things in the kitchen. After all, supper was still cooking, while she headed outside to work on kunai throwing with the girl, while Ki told her all about how they had worked on transformation today. Soon the rest of the family began to arrive home. Kushina was first, happily joining the other two in the yard, adding her own tips and tricks to the kunoichi and trainings lesson. When Naruto and Masaki arrived, they acted like they had spent a decade separated from one another, practically glued to one another's side with hands entwined throughout the rest of the evening, making them prime targets to be teased by their mothers and little sister. Not that she knew what the real joke was in that situation. Naruto and Masaki went to bed together that night knowing they would spend a full day apart in the morning. Their mothers didn't bother interfering, knowing it was a pointless endeavor. Instead, they simply went off to their own room and curled up together, enjoying one another's bodies and letting go of their worries and stresses. Chapter 2. The Real Deal. As morning came, Naruto and Masaki rose with the sun. Not all that happy to do so, despite both not really being the type to sleep in. They were reluctant to leave bed this morning though. After all, they had nothing but a full day apart from one another to look forward to. Any excitement surrounding the fact that they would be taking their final genin test from their Jonin sensei today was tainted in the fact that they would not be taking it together. That being said, Kushina had taken the day off for the specific reason of spending most of it with their family all together before the two eldest children in the household began starting on missions. The red-headed woman wasn't about to let the two young graduates spoil her rare day off from duty. Wake up. Get out of bed. Time for breakfast. She bellowed up the stairs from the kitchen where she and Mikoto enjoyed cooking together. Naruto groaned and latched more tightly to Masaki than he had before, causing her to stir in irritation. Naruto was a bit too much of a cuddler at times, and while she had great difficulty sleeping anywhere besides right beside him, at the moment she was pretty sure he was cutting off some circulation in her limbs. Naruto, get up. She started softly enough while trying to wriggle free of his vice-like hold. When that didn't work, much to her annoyance, as when it came to grappling she was almost always able to break any hold he had on her in a spar, she tried a different tactic. Squeezing her fingers together, she pinched the flesh of his side through his nightshirt, causing him to release her with a yelp. It also caused him to stumble backward out of the bed and sprawl across the floor. "Masaki, what the hell?" he asked as he rubbed both his side and his now aching back. "I couldn't feel my fingers, you were holding on to me so tightly," she shot back as she climbed out of bed herself and began to stretch. "Seemed fine to me," he replied with a mild glare, getting no response from his half-sister. Instead, the dark-haired girl simply strode past him and down the stairs toward the kitchen. "Put on some pants or something and hurry up. You don't want Kushimama to come get you. I'll tell her you're still in bed," Masaki slyly said as she left the room. Naruto grumbled about having a love-hate relationship with his sister, and how she didn't need to be so pushy. Still, he did as she said and was down the stairs only a little after she was. He was plenty excited to enjoy breakfast with his family, even if he was bothered by taking the genin exams without Masaki there with him. Kushina and Mikoto shared a grin as they watched Masaki join Kid at the table, with a little kiss to the girl's head, getting a happy smile from the child. Naruto followed down a short while later, much more loudly and clearly, having just pulled on a pair of shorts as he adjusted their position so they weren't uncomfortably crooked. "Oh, look at this, Miko. Remember when Naruto and Masaki were just little babies?" she asked. "Definitely, really makes you wonder where the time goes," Mikoto said a bit dreamily, getting a soft smile from her wife in return for the comment. Both of them briefly recalling the times before the Kyuubi attack, back when there were 3 parents in the house rather than 2 and there were even a couple more children. "Good morning to you all too," Naruto huffed as he sat at the table and poured himself a glass of milk. "Oh, Kushina. It seems our 2 graduates are not in the proper mindset for the day," Mikoto commented as she made sure to flip the eggs she had cooking. "Ugh. You're both in such good moods. It makes mine worse," Masaki grumbled as she took up her brother's glass and drank out of it, much to his annoyance, as he poured another. "So, plans for the day?" Mikoto asked as she plated up the last of breakfast, and the family all sat together. "Well, we have our genin test with our teams. I don't know after that though," Naruto said as he began digging into his food. I can walk Kid to class with you and then we can just spend some time together before we all go out to eat for dinner," Kushina suggested. "Go out? Where to?" Masaki asked. "Where else?" Mikoto giggled as she watched Kid's eyes widen. She grew a tiny bit worried as the young girl forced herself to swallow down the mouthful of food without chewing just so that she could cheer at the idea. "Ikaraku's," Kid hollered. The room seemed to be in agreement with that. Dinner plans were ironed out, and soon, both Naruto and Masaki had to race around to be properly prepared for their team meetings, while Kushina and Mikoto helped Kid to get around for her own day. Kushina was a bit displeased that breakfast had only been a few short minutes before Naruto and Masaki realized what time it was and scarfed down their food to start getting ready. She and Mikoto realized that their 2 eldest would be struggling for the day. Neither were comfortable being apart, and they knew that, but they didn't try and interfere on their behalf. Not only were they not about to try and push for favoritism for their children, especially with the fact most of Konoha expected such nepotism in favor of Naruto and Masaki, making it necessary for their family to go out of their way to keep such accusations from having any real foundation. "They'll be fine, Kushina," Mikoto called over to her wife as she finished brushing Kid's hair. "I know they'll be fine, but I also know that they will be off balance. It might affect their interaction with their teammates. Better now than out in the field then. They can't always be together. Plus, we probably should have put an end to that before it got to this point. There are already rumors about them," Mikoto commented. "Rumors?" Kushina asked. "For once, not ones about the Kyuubi?" "Yeah, I guess that is kind of a silver lining. Still, there is plenty for all the housewives and retirees to gossip about. They think that the 2 of them are being groomed to be together," Mikoto explained. Kushina snorted. "Is that all? Wasn't that what we were doing?" Mikoto blinked. "What?" "Well, weren't we hoping the 2 of them would be together in some form or other? Masaki won't be happy she will have to share Naruto one day, but she can help keep the Namikaze clan from being moved in on by some sleazy bastard. All she has to do is follow the path she already chose. She seems happy enough to do that too," Kushina explained. "Kushina, they're half-siblings," Mikoto argued weakly. "Mikoto, you were born into the Uchiha clan. Every member of your family had at least one parent or grandparent that was at the very least a half-sibling to another. You included." Kushina rolled her eyes. She knew Mikoto. She'd blow smoke and complain about how the civilians and lesser shinobi families would see it. The real issue was that she was worried Masaki felt pushed into such a position like she had with Fugaku. The Mikoto began only to pause as Kushina turned to fully face her. "Miko, stop. You're projecting. You know that you are too. I don't know why you are so worked up. You used to talk about Naruto and Masaki maybe ending up like that with me all the time. What changed? Kushina asked. When Mikoto didn't answer immediately, she drew in closely and slid her arms around the other woman in a warm, tender hug. Love, tell me what's going on in that head. I'm no Yamanaka, I can only guess you know. Kushina teased slightly. Mikoto sighed but shook her head and broke the embrace. We need to get Ki to class. Fine. Kushina said with a bit more of an edge than she wanted to. We'll come back here after and actually talk. Mikoto sighed again but knew trying to argue the point was pointless. The Uzumaki woman was relentless in the things she wanted. She'd wear Mikoto down in the long run, but still, Mikoto wasn't sure how to answer. How do you tell someone that you probably felt pointless or unneeded when you knew they were working themselves ragged half of the time just for you? Even Ki noticed the distant, thoughtful look on her Miko mama's face as they headed off to the academy. The little girl expected it was because she was thinking about the family dinner that night. She was too, after all. She adored the little ramen stand that had evidently been a family favorite for years. Naruto met his teammates almost right as it was time for their Jonin sensei to arrive. He was still a bit aggravated, or rather distracted by Masaki not being present, but as his sensei had rather bluntly suggested the day before, he was present in body and mind. At least to the point where he hoped it wouldn't affect the team. Sakura and Sai both seemed happy enough to have him there with them, and not staring off into space. Though, with the more boisterous friends she had and the fact that it was simply in his nature, either were all that prone to start up a conversation with Naruto. Something that probably would have eventually led him to thinking about what his sister was doing. Thankfully, Aoba arrived before his mind began drifting and surprised all three of the junior shinobi with a sudden bloody flicker and unnaturally loud clap of his hands. The man chuckled faintly as the trio all jolted before glaring his way at the sudden shock. This was going to be a lot of fun today. Pass or fail. Alright, you three, let's not waste any time. I'm very glad you all made it and seem ready to take this on, because I'm not going to take it easy on you just because you are a likable bunch. The Jonin began as he took in the expressions of his three possible students. They were determined. Good. He had no doubt in his mind that all three could be excellent shinobi and even had the skill and potential to easily surpass himself. He just wanted to help them along that path to do so. That meant setting them off in the right direction right from the get-go. So, I'm sure you're completely focused down on what we are about to do here. Or at least for the most part, huh? Aoba asked as he gave Naruto a sidelong glance. At least the boy had the decency to blush slightly. It wasn't a big issue, but Aoba could already tell that was going to be an issue for him to handle with him, which was a bit annoying because he had expected Naruto to be his easiest student. Anyway, let's take a step back for a second and clarify something about the Konoha team structure. Can any of you tell me why you were all placed onto my team? He asked. The silence was telling. A few shared glances between the kids, hoping one of the others had an answer, was a great sign though. It likely meant that they would be more prone to work together, which, this test, like all the tests the Jonins were giving their teams, was all about. Don't stress, kids, that's not part of your test. Trust me, I'll let you know when that begins. Aoba calmed them down. Anyway, every team is created with a focus. A sort of framework to build off of the talents every one of you have when graduating. Putting you together with a teacher that can grow that same talent so that you eventually become Chunin, and eventually beyond that advance onto Tokujo, or hopefully Jonin. Makes sense, but that's kind of obvious, sensei. Sakura quietly pointed out. Aoba nodded at her input. You're right. That's the obvious part, but that makes you wonder what each team is focused on. Take your classmates in Team Kakashi. You have an Uchiha, a Hyuga, and an Inuzuka. All of that led by a guy that I know you have at least heard of. Aoba explained. Can you guess what their team focus will be on? When they shared glances and were still a bit too unsure to speak up with their guesses, Aoba decided to pull them into trying. Sai, what do you think? The pale boy was quiet for a moment but seemed to quickly formulate his answer. Assault? The Uchiha and Hyuga dojutsus lend advantages in combat that make them extremely dangerous for enemy opponents, and Inuzuka clan members are typically characterized by aggressive action in combat and skill with tracking. Good answer. You're mostly right, however the actual designation for that team would be an attack squad. For Konoha the typical designations are attack, assault, security, tracking, infiltration, capture and elimination, and defense squads. The difference between attack and assault being that attack squads are focused on confronting and engaging enemy shinobi while assault squads are more for breaching enemy defenses or locations. Aoba explained. The kids were following along, but this wasn't a classroom, so the Jonin was done info dumping on his kids and ready to get to his point. So can you guess what kind of squad we are? Aoba asked. The kids once again shared a look before Naruto decided to answer. A security squad? Good guess. Security squads almost exclusively perform bodyguard or protection and transport missions. They are actually among our most common squad, but every team has a bit of overlap with them as protection missions are sort of the bread and butter of shinobi missions. Thing is, I kind of tricked you a bit. Remember when I said those were the typical designations for a squad? Aoba asked. The students all nodded and the Jonin smiled slightly. He was only lecturing, but the attentive way they hung on his words was kind of nice, and it made him actually enjoy this a little bit. You were right with the security team part to an extent. We will perform primarily security team tasks, however our squad is actually a response team. Recall yesterday when I mentioned I was a sort of jack of all trades kind of guy. You three will be too. This whole team will be. Response teams obviously act as a fill-in team and reinforcement teams in most situations, or in the case of conflict are typically the first responders our village can use to engage the enemy. Aoba continued. So our test has something to do with that? Sakura asked, and again Aoba grinned. Kind of. Since you will typically filling the role of a security team, your test will reflect that, he said before flicking a scroll toward each of them. That scroll is not to be opened until the end of the test. If you open it prior to that, you individually fail. Furthermore, if I open it prior to the end of the test, you all fail. Aoba began to grin as his words sunk in, and the kids began to step back. You have 30 minutes to hide and plan, after which I will be coming for those scrolls. Whichever of you loses your scroll and has it opened fails the test. Whoever is remaining by noon will become my students. He continued, getting agitated expressions with gritted teeth as a response. Good, he could already tell they were getting stoked up for what was to come. It was light pressure, admittedly, but still his team would gradually need to learn to work perfectly despite pressure and stress if they were going to make it as his team. If they couldn't pass this simplistic test, then they didn't need to be on the field either. The boundaries are this entire training ground, so good luck kids, see you in half an hour, he said before disappearing into a body flicker. The three preteens shot one another look as their minds spun to life trying to figure out the best course of action. Masaki was jealous of her brother at the moment. She wasn't sure what it was he was doing, but she was almost completely certain it had been better than what she had to do. Not only had she been forced to leave ridiculously earlier than him as her test was at an early point in time, she barely made it in time. That was just the start of problems, though. The moment she had gotten to the training ground, things had gone south fast. Really fast. Suddenly being jumped by wild animals of all things, a pack of oversized wolves, she and her teammates had been scattered by the beasts almost immediately. Thankfully, Yakumo seemed to realize that they were dealing with extremely realistic genjutsu almost immediately as well. Shino realized not too long after, but Masaki herself had struggled with the surprise attack for a while before remembering that Kurenai's skills lied in genjutsu and ambush tactics. She felt stupid for taking so long and was a bit annoyed by the fact that Yakumo and Shino had so easily seen through the trick. She was supposed to be the best girl in their class after all. The illusion used wasn't even that good of one. Something her own mother had used to entertain Masaki, Naruto, and Kid when they were each babies and toddlers. The following conversation had been thankfully able to distract her from the fact that she was focusing on her shortcomings a little too hard, essentially comparing herself to two students she subconsciously considered herself better than. Kurenai had rounded them all up and briefly lectured them about being ready for anything and expecting traps, even close to home. The woman had then lectured them even more on the different types of teams and their purposes for the village. In the end, the conversation boiled down to that they were a capture and elimination team. She even explained that with Masaki's future use of the Sharingan coupled with Yakumo's skill in genjutsu, and Shino's abilities with his hive of insects, they were the perfect selection for such a role. So not only was she pulled out to the training ground, far earlier than her lucky brother, she also had to sit through a boring lecture that could have been summed up in a brief explanation. Just as she had begun to silently complain about this in her head, she realized something. Kurenai seemed to have made a point to check the time over and over again. Neither of her teammates had seemed to notice, but Masaki had. When the fourth time checking the time, Masaki felt herself begin to tense as she realized something was going to happen. She didn't know exactly when or exactly what, but she knew something was going to happen. Kurenai smirked at the sight of Masaki finally catching on. "What's wrong, Masaki?" she asked, playing coy. The dark-haired girl stared up at her sensei and grit her teeth in annoyance. It had to be something to do with the test that Kurenai had previously mentioned. She still hadn't the faintest idea, though. "Something for the test is about to happen," Masaki said simply, and immediately both Yakumo and Shino were tensing alongside her. "Is it?" Kurenai asked, though her smile was almost imperceptible in its change. Masaki could see the gleam of approval and mild amusement in the woman's red eyes. "I don't know what or even really when, I just know it is," Masaki replied. "How do you know?" Yakumo asked, though she remained tense. She wasn't doubting Masaki, but she did want to know what they were dealing with here. "She's been checking the time way too often," Masaki replied. "She also has looked at the entryway to the training area a total of 45 times since she began our session here in the training ground. I believe she is expecting someone or something to arrive," Shino commented. "Makes sense," Masaki said to her teammate before turning her attention to Kurenai. So what's going on, sensei? You told us there would be a test. What is it? Well, you three are doing pretty well so far. The test started the moment you arrived at the training ground though. It's a multi-part kind of thing. You passed the first part when you broke the illusion I ambushed you with. As I said, this is a capture and elimination team. You saw what that meant from the other side of things, but now it's time to test you on what our job will be. Kurenai explained as she produced 3 small kits. The students looked at the small packages in curiosity. They were essentially small brushes shaped very vaguely like paint brushes. The handles were clear though, and they could make out a mixture of paint inside that was leaking out onto the bristles of the brushes. These are specifically designed for training in assassination and ambush missions. You can probably imagine that a capture and elimination team like ours will be getting very familiar with such equipment. So I figured it would be good to get used to using it as soon as possible. Kurenai said as she handed one to each of her team. The next part of your test starts now. Sometime today an individual will be coming here to this training ground. Your task is simply to ambush them and mark a kill point on their person. Each of you must mark a kill shot. That's why each of you have a different color of paint in your brush. Kurenai explained. So who is it? Masaki asked. Kurenai smiled again. Sadly, you will not know until they get here. All you know is that a target is coming to this training ground sometime today, and you have to assassinate them. But we don't even know when. What if the wrong person comes in? Yakumo pointed out. Sadly, your intel only knows that it will be sometime today. Before noon. Kurenai commented, causing the 2 girls to grumble about that fact. Shino simply readjusted his glasses as Kurenai chuckled. So what? We just wait around all day? Masaki asked. Sure, if you want to. I'm hands off. Just know that if by sundown today the target isn't marked with your color of paint, then you fail. With that, Kurenai's body flickered away, causing Masaki to drop her jaw in shock. She couldn't believe that Kurenai was giving them so little to go on. Shino made a thoughtful sound, getting both girls' attentions. What is it, Shino? Yakumo asked quietly. I believe this test is not only about marking the enemy but also about how we set up the ambush to achieve that goal. The boy replied. Makes sense, Masaki said. We still don't really know anything about who we are facing though. They could be anyone, Yakumo said. Well, who do you think it will be? Masaki asked her. What? She asked in confusion. It would make sense that the most capable to guess who our target is would be you, Yakumo. Why? Because you live with Kurenai-sensei and know her better than we do, Shino explained. Exactly. Any ideas? Masaki asked. Yakumo was quiet after that. She really was the best to try and guess their target. After all, she actually saw Kurenai that morning for breakfast. The woman had been excited to work with her team and reminded her not to be late, saying how she hated when people were tardy to any kind of appointment. Which reminded her that Kurenai's not-so-secret boyfriend Asuma had been nearly 20 minutes late to their date a few nights prior. One thing Yakumo and almost no one else knew about Kurenai was that she was actually kind of a petty person. Not so much as to write someone off on little things or something like that. No, it was more like she believed everyone had to be gotten back if they did something to her. Nothing vicious, but Kurenai was actually quite adept at pulling pranks on people and them not even realizing it was a prank. The only other person that really knew such a thing about Kurenai was probably Asuma, who Yakumo was sure currently rested at the top of Kurenai's list. I think I know, Yakumo said, though her expression had become a deadpan stare as she realized Kurenai was essentially using them to punish her boyfriend. Masaki and Shino were a bit confused by their teammate's expression but listened intently as the girl began getting the ball rolling on a plan. Kushina frowned as she closed the front door to her family home. She didn't normally interact with the average everyday citizenry of the Hidden Leaf, but today had been an eye-opener. She had known the opinions of the people toward her family had slipped badly over the years, most especially toward Mikoto, Masaki, and Naruto, but to the extent she had seen. Mikoto, we should talk to the Hokage, Kushina said with heat in her tone. Oh, stop it. They didn't do anything to us, Kushina. The Ravenette scoffed as she removed her shoes and stepped into the house proper. Bullshit. Those little whispers? Kushina asked while making air quotations with her fingers. Words. That's it. Plus, what do you want the Hokage to do? He can't punish people for talking to each other, Kushina. He'd get ousted by the shinobi in a month's time. Not to mention he would never go for it, she said. Kushina practically snarled at that fact. It was all true, but she was just getting more and more pissed off about it. The way these snotty little civilians treated her family behind her back while she worked tirelessly every day to keep them all safe in the walls of the village. Bastards. You need to calm down. You're working yourself up and you are going to do something stupid, Mikoto scolded while she grabbed hold of Kushina's hands and pulled her fully into the living room to sit on the couch. The red-headed woman said nothing. She didn't want to argue. Especially not with Mikoto when those bitches were targeting her specifically. That thought caused her teeth to click and her fists to clench again at the outrage she felt at their audacity. Kushina! Mikoto snapped, pulling the Uzumaki matriarch out of her stormy thoughts surrounding several of the housewives they'd encountered both at the academy and at the market. It's not right, she hissed. Kushina, you are smarter and wiser than that. Grow up, Mikoto said as she dropped the redhead's hands and stood up to make her way to the kitchen. Kushina huffed before standing to follow. It's unacceptable, Kushina said in a slightly more controlled grumble. Mikoto shook her head but turned back to cleaning the breakfast dishes. Kushina stared at the other woman and could practically see the tension within her body. She felt a bit bad now. She knew Mikoto literally better than anyone left alive in the world. She wasn't necessarily the type to bottle things up, but she did compartmentalize things, essentially separating the life within their home away from that in the village. Kushina had essentially carried all the stuff from out in the village that hurt Mikoto right into her immaculate safe haven. She felt horrible about that, and realized in that same instant just how much time she had been spending away from her family. Sure, she returned every night, usually in time for a family dinner and a bit of time together before everyone went to bed. The thing was, she knew she had been essentially neglecting them of her attention. Especially Mikoto, her wife, even after their shared husband had passed on. I'm sorry, she whispered as she glided across the room and swept up behind Mikoto at the sink. Kushina wrapped her in an embrace and pressed her face into the crook of her neck, burying herself in the dark locks of hair hanging there. It's fine. I just know it won't help anything to stir up trouble, Mikoto replied softly. Kushina hummed an affirmative response but simply continued to hold Mikoto, who leaned back into the embrace. It was nice to feel comforted like this. I miss having you at home more, Mikoto admitted as she felt Kushina's breath against her tender neck. I know. I miss it too. I miss a lot of things from back then, Kushina quietly replied. Mikoto carefully turned while still in Kushina's arms and pressed her forehead lightly against Kushina's. The pair simply stayed like that for a moment, almost synchronizing their breathing. Slowly, though, a small grin began to spread on Kushina's face. You know, it's been a while, she cooed. Not here in the kitchen, Mikoto said with a blush. Bah, the kids won't be home for a long while. Remember when Naruto was around? You and I would fool around all over the house to try and get him to catch us, Kushina said with a smile. Mikoto giggled at the memory, before moaning slightly as Kushina's hands began to roam. Kushina, she harshly whispered, though she didn't stop the redhead as she began to push a hand between Mikoto's legs and start groping her. Just relax and enjoy it, Miko, Kushina practically sang to her wife. What if Mikoto is possessive of Naruto harem? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.